Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another MSEM set review, in which me, Dodger, Pipsqueak, and usually Kevin come together to review one of the many custom sets that exists in the context of MSEM, a custom card constructed format. Today's set is The Unraveling by Just Nobody, which just received a big limited focused overhaul, which perfectly coincides with us reviewing this. But it's also been in MSEM as a whole for a while and played a strong role in essentially shaping the meta. So it's going to be interesting to track both of those, the new changes which we're excited to see in the future, and how it's already affected MSCM in the past. So, do you guys have any specific comments before we move into checking out card by card?
Yeah, so sometimes in these reviews we talk about like, oh, the rarity of this, especially for older sets, and how that influence is limited. But the Unraveling is actually one of the sets in MSEM that has had the most limited play to it, and it's a very unique experience. If you're someone who likes limiteds and really likes kind of outside the box drafting, some pun intended, um, you should definitely stop by the MSEM server because this is a environment that is definitely worth trying out.
And the reason that
Yeah,
Pip
and
said
oh,
outside the box is because um, there's a set of cards called puzzle boxes, which are banned in MSEM proper but are legal in its limited, which essentially function like you can choose a card and have it outside the game attached to a puzzle box condition. And when you fulfill the puzzle box condition, you can usually put it into your hand. Some of them have you put it on top of your deck instead, unless it's a specific color. So it allows you to essentially build around specific cards in a way that you usually can't in limited, and allows you
yeah,
to like forego the kind of redundancy with commons and uncommons style deck that typically has to exist.
yeah, and I believe that's the only new mechanic in the set. But the set also features both investigate and flashback as recurring mechanics.
Yeah, and I think that like it's hard to justify a set solely based on returning mechanics, but the mechanical themes of Unraveling are so off the wall that the actual mechanics that are tied to them don't really like matter. Even if you've seen a flashback and investigate in a bunch of other custom sets, I can guarantee you haven't seen them used in an environment like this. Not even
Yeah,
close.
it's the set as a whole is really about finding new ways to do things that you hadn't really thought about before. And flashback and investigate are both like very modular mechanics that you can use to fit into a bunch of different strategies. So that's kind of the cool part about how they're used in this set.
I would also say just this set was definitely designed with the hope that it would play phenomenally in limited, and there's not really a lot of reason to reinvent the wheel. If you know Flashback
Mm.
plays amazing in limited, which it does, and you know Investigate plays amazing in limited, which it does, and you think that those give you enough mechanical room to work with, why not just go with those? It's not something I would recommend for every designer, but definitely if you can bring the you know off the wall designs in other ways, which JN definitely did in this, it's good enough. The other thing I would say, like while we're looking at these cards, is especially the lower rarity ones are just so flexible. There's so many different little synergies they have, and a lot of those synergies are really subtle. And that's a big part of what makes this limited so endlessly replayable, is because every single time you draft it, you evaluate cards a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
All
Yeah,
right, I think we're ready to get into some cards.
for sure. And do you
Yep.
want to start us off, Dodger?
Sure. Yeah. So the first card is Blossom Ash Trance, which is a 3 mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 3 life. And at the beginning of each end step, if you gain 3 more life this turn, you draw a card. So at base, this is kind of like a bad Revitalize at sorcery speed, but in multiples, or if you do have any other way to repeatedly trigger this, this can kind of become a little mini engine for various types of decks, maybe Enchantress. I don't know.
The other thing I would say is Revitalize that you can flicker also becomes more interesting.
That's
I
true.
don't think Revitalize is that far off from being MSEM playable. We have two Revitalize likes. One of them has seen MSEM play before. It's a hybrid green white card from Turning at Whiterun, I believe, and it saw play in JN's bug control list way back in the day.
Wait, isn't it also like
and in
strictly
general-
better as well? Because you can choose
Yeah.
to you can choose to gain 6 life instead.
So no, that's the other one. That's the one I made, which is the mono white one. We have 2 strictly better ones. So this one has a fair bit of competition, and I don't think you should run just like in generic control decks. But I do think that it's a powerful engine, and one worth keeping in mind, which is going to be a phrase you hear a lot throughout this review.
I think the unfortunate thing when it comes to flickering this is that if you flicker it, you're not actually going to get the card off of it if it's this slow flicker, because it'll come back at the beginning of the next end step, and by then you kind of missed your window for it to check whether or not you gained life.
Or like end step Aetherize with something like Rippling Curtain.
Yeah, I mean there's stuff you can do for sure, but like you kind of need fast flicker, I think, which does make it a little more narrow.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Next up, we have Dispersive Volley, which is 1 and a white for an instant, and you either deal 1 damage to each of up to 3 target attacking or blocking creatures, or target player sacrifices an enchantment. I think I was the first person to register this in a GP. Correct me if I'm wrong, Pip. But this was kind of a good sideboard piece at a time where, like, Villainy and Hunter's Hideout decks were happening, and we didn't have the interaction suite that we did today, and it could also just randomly be good against aggressive decks. Now I think the meta has shifted to where it's not, like, it's still playable, but I think it isn't, like, it's much more niche than it used to be, but it's still like a really neat piece of sideboard tech.
I think it unfortunately lines up kind of awkwardly into the aggro decks that are currently good in MSEM, but if tokens decks ever come back in any meaningful way, I've main decked this card in blue-white control before, and it felt solid. 1 mana for either of these modes isn't like the most nuts efficient thing imaginable, but it's pretty goddamn efficient. So
Yeah, if you get like 3 for 1 an opponent with this, it feels brutal.
Yeah, if you get a 3 for 1, you've won the game, but also most likely if it kills 3 creatures, they didn't spend cards on all those creatures. But, just shooting 3 devised companions, being able to trade 1 for 1 with the devised companions and actually up on tempo is pretty nuts. And especially in non-black decks where you don't have access to good, cheap 1 toughness sweepers, highly recommend.
Yeah, I think that the first mode that this card has is something it actually does better than pretty much any other card in that slot in metas where it actually is on. So you kind of treat it as like, okay, this is playable if the first mode is relevant, and then it gets better if you can also sometimes randomly hit strong enchantments. So I think this is a very skill testing card when it comes to like deck construction, and understanding when this is good in the meta is like a very valuable skill.
Okay. Pip, you want to take our next card?
Alright, so Garnier of the Eclipse is 1 white for a 2/1 first strike. When it attacks, you may exile another target attack creature you control, then return to the battlefield under your control, tapped and attacking. It's also a wizard and a soldier, which are both pretty relevant creature types. So 2/1 first strike Piker does not get there in the average game of Constructed, but it is a stat line that actually is kind of obnoxious if creature combat comes up. And being able to flicker one of your creatures every single turn and do so without dropping pressure is very good in the decks that want it. I definitely would be looking for decks that have flickerable aggro creatures. So something like Academic Renegade from Storytime, where it's an ETB Flametongue Kavu that also deals damage to your opponent based on the number of wizards control, and this coincidentally is a wizard. But just in general, it's a cheap and powerful engine.
Yeah, this feels like the type of card that, as an engine, is going to be a bit like less nuts than a lot of the other engine cards are when you enable it. But it's also like not that hard to enable. Like it's not hard to imagine a situation where you're playing an aggro deck that has good cheap creatures with ETBs, you have this 2 mana 2/1 first strike, and you're just swinging in, getting value. Like it's one of the more fair cards in the set, to be honest.
Yeah, I would curving stock tailor into this seems like a really good time.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
I think one of the key things is figuring out both good 1-drops with ETBs that you don't mind attacking with, and good 3-drops with haste and ETBs that you don't mind attacking with, or just synergies in general.
I can take the next card.
The next card, I kind of want to talk about it because it's a card that I've been trying to break for a while.
Yeah, go for it.
It's Herald of the Follow Years, and it's 1 and a white for a 2/2 vigilance. The real text though is creature spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. So this is basically, I think like the closest analog is probably Heartless Summoning, and like I've been trying. I literally have like a bookmarks folder, which is just a bunch of like cards that can maybe go into Herald of Follow Years deck. We also have I forget the name, but we also have like some redundancy for this.
Savrios' Masterpiece, I believe.
I believe that is the one. Yeah. The main issue is just like being a creature reliant combo deck is difficult. I don't know that we have all of the pieces, or if we have all the pieces, it's currently a 4+ piece combo. But I think it's a card to just keep an eye on, and because anytime we get like a good like 1 or 2 colorless card, suddenly I think it's a reason to reevaluate. Is this deck actually playable now? Especially if it's something that has some sort of recursion.
The other thing you can think of doing with this is other creatures that bounce Herald. So not that this is a good thing you can do, but turn 2 play this, turn 3 you can play a 5-drop, and if that 5-drop bounces Herald, that 5-drop can then attack or block. Or expensive creatures that have sack outlet stapled to them. Because in general, it's not that it gives the creatures that you cast this can't attack or block. It's specifically they only have that while Herald is in play, or just a bunch of utility creatures that you don't need to attack or block. Like, I agree that the combo route is probably the best way to go, because I don't think MSEM is a format where you can just be like sitting there dirtling forever, especially if you literally can neither apply pressure to your opponent or block your opponent's pressure. But I do think that it's easier to make a fair use case out of this card than it looks at first glance.
I think the main reason that I would balk at the fair use case is just because there is that what's the name? Something champion. It's 1 in a red, Wanderlust. You create a 4/4 direct. Champion of Scales. And I feel like if you're trying to do like the ramp to 5 route, and you're gonna have to sack Herald anyways, that probably does it better. And also, the fail case is a bear that once you hit 4 lands starts pumping out 4 flying power. So.
Yeah. I mean, you could use this in a deck that has just like some kind of pod-ish engine and a ton of creatures, and then maybe also incidentally has a sack outlet, which means you could use this to cheat on mana for a while, and then when you're ready to start attacking, you can just sack it off and go about your business. That's the scenario that I see it most likely to be used, aside from enabling some combo. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, cool card.
Yeah, there's lots of cards that work kind of cutely with this, which I won't totally go into. But Volda's Toolbox is one thing. I think that's what the name of it. But it's like 2 mana for essentially a creature version of I think it's called Serum Powder. So, and I think that like if you're running a combo version of this deck, that becomes like a lot better, because it's a creature that you can free cast off of Herald that also improves your mulliganing by a lot. So I think that's just one thing to keep an eye on. But yeah, look, if you're interested in this card, dig into Instigator. You'll find lots of lovely stuff.
The next card is one I have a very soft spot for, because when Cyber and I found it for the first time, we were convinced we had broken the meta open. Because High Chancellor Casimir kind of neatly answered a lot of decks when we found it. So for 4 mana, it's a 3/4 legendary creature. Whenever a player, not just you, casts a non-creature spell, you get a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. And 1 in a blue, tap 4 untapped creatures you control. Counter target non-creature spell. So part of the theory with this is, hey, this is a really good threat that doesn't die to villainy. Both our villainies and our opponent's villainies. In general, when Memento Mori and villainy and those sorts of effects were everywhere, this card seemed kind of unstoppable. And those effects weren't actually as common as my perception of them led me to believe, because I was just playing those effects a lot. But the fact that it can put you in a game state where, one, it applies a bunch of pressure to your opponent, and two, you can just lock out your combo opponents from being able to play the game is really exciting. The main issue with this card, and also, it doesn't die to bolt, which is kind of great. The main issue with this card, it's a 4-drop. And to be really nuts, you need to have mana open after you cast your 4-drop. So that's kind of an impossibly difficult sell. I definitely still think this card is nuts in control mirrors, and I wouldn't be shocked to see it show up back there eventually if people, end up going back to old tech. But I think this card is a little bit sus to play in the main deck.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, like, Universal Strikebreaker does the threat that also doesn't die to your own exits pretty cleanly. But yeah, I think that 4-drops might also be coming back into vogue given Pitwelt Cursory Glance. We've been saying this for like a lot of reviews now, and I think that it's still true to a degree, even though Pitwelt has kind of fallen out of favor versus Journey's End and Event Horizon.
I kind of think this might want to be in the sideboard of my current GP deck.
I strongly agree. I should have remembered it when you were showing me your GP deck in the first place.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never really seen this card before, but it seems like it's pretty good there. Definitely Brace Control Mirrors. Really good in decks that just also happen to generate tokens. Really good in decks that generally play at flash speed. If you have some kind of way to flash this out, like maybe if you're playing a Widget Invocation deck, that's another like way this card could be more useful. I don't know, just like a really nice the weird card, like the very UNR thing about this card is that it seems like it's just a fair card, but you do have to build around it a little bit, I think, to make it like hit its full potential, just because of how the numbers are set up.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely wanted to explore this at a couple points in decks with Mana Dorks, because I think if you can get this down faster, this card's nuts, and I think Mana Dorks also help because they make it more easy for you to have the untapped creatures portion. The main issue is Mana Dorks and critical density of non-creature spells don't really go hand in hand, but I guess the upside is if your opponent is playing non-creature spells, this card is still nuts.
Yeah, for sure. All right. I guess I can take the next card.
For sure.
It seems good.
Next card is Immortalizing Stone. It's a 3-mana sorcery. You exile target creature card from any graveyard, and you create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a colorless artifact, and it's not actually a creature anymore. So this is kind of like you trade in the reanimation spell costing 1 less mana for not having it actually what you reanimate have any power and toughness. And this kind of means that this reanimates effectively a smaller subset of targets. Some notable ones that I can think of are like powerful ETBs, like Tyrant of Tributes, or some other insane ETB. Or I think one that I've seen before with this is Platinum Colossus, to kind of just get like a permanent, passive that makes these creatures enormous. Yeah.
I think you picked the wrong green mythic from Chikyu, by the way, in terms of good
champion,
targets.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's also, I mean...
This used to be 2 mana, but then it was nerfed because I think it had numerous turn 2, turn 3 kills, and that was...
It only really had one. Like, it was just a Scrapyard Sovereign one. But the issue is, we really realized that 2 mana reanimation heavily limits what you can have in the format safely.
Yeah.
And I guess there was technically a Platinum Colossus one, but no one ever pulled that off because I think that you need to be kind of maniacal to do it, because it's turn 1 play a Air Blossom and a Silent Wanderer, and then turn 2 immortalize the Plat Colossus, and it's like, why are you playing Silent Wanderer in your combo deck?
Yeah. But yeah,
I mean, I don't know. It's like it's pretty straightforward what you want to do with this. And like even though it's a little weird, it's like not that hard to figure out like what's good to reanimate with this and what isn't. It's also a flavorful design, so I like that a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, next up we have Casimir's Ban. It's 2 white and a white, and players can't cast spells with converted mana cost greater than the number of descent counters on Casimir's Ban. However, any player can pay 2 to put a descent counter on it, so it doesn't truly lock your opponent out of the game. I think that this is like kind of an evil card if you have some way to like move around counters, or perhaps only put only like remove counters from it on your opponent's turn and then put them on yours. I'm not sure how that would work. I know there's also sorry, one thing. There's also a pure lock with the card from Rail War, which there's an aura which has enchant permanent, and then enchanted permanent can't have counters placed on it. So you can.
That's from Spark of Revolution, actually.
Spark of Revolution, my bad, but yeah. So you slapped on.
Oh wait, sorry. No, you're right. I'm thinking of a different card, which is enchanted permanent's abilities can't be activated.
Which also does a similar impression.
I was gonna suggest a much worse combo, which is somehow animating this and then using permutate to remove.
Oh my fucking god! I mean, you had
Stonks.
Pretty fast, presumably.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, and like when we do have reasonable win cons to win through Casimir's Ban lock, like Markarth Assailant, or if my original idea was Watch the World Fade, but then you don't actually win there. But yeah.
So what you do? Okay, I don't know if either of you guys are familiar with Ye Olden Legacy, but there was a deck called Landstill that used the card Standstill, which is 1 in blue enchantment. Whenever a player casts.
Man, I'm sad that Landstill is apparently now Ye Old Legacy.
Oh yeah, not in ages. But anyway, you can do the same thing here. If you lock people out with Casimir's Ban and a Pithing Needle, you play Pithing Needle, you name Casimir's Ban, you then cast Casimir's Ban. Players can't cast spells with converted mana costs. You then play a Monument of Queens and you stare your opponent dead in the eye.
And then they play their Monument of Queens.
Oh man, and now we're getting perfect hand magic going.
And you Pithing Needle Monument of Queens and the game draws.
No, in that circumstance, you just have your One of Desert holdout in hand.
Of course. So, I actually think the best way to use this card, you just play this in your White Weenie sideboard. You play against the control deck. You go 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop. You play this. Now they have to spend their next turn or two allowing themselves to cast more spells. It's kind of an Armageddon as long as you're using that next couple turns to kill them.
Yeah, usually it's 4 mana of yours for 4 mana of theirs for them to be able to cast 2 mana spells to kind of be able to play Magic. It should not shock anyone that JN's primary form of engaging with Magic, other than MSEM, was Cube, and he is a big believer in the issue with White Weenie and MSEM was the lack of Armageddons. So the goal of this card was give White Weenie an Armageddon.
Man, now that I know that was the intended function of this card, is it weird that I kind of like it less?
You're like, ooh, I want some weird combo card, not this Armageddon aggro deck bullshit.
Yeah, straightforward and has a role? What kind of shit is this? I thought UNR was supposed to be about funky build-arounds.
I mean, Armageddon is a
build-around.
But is it funky,
you have to play creatures.
Have you seen anyone actually play... Yeah. All right. Should we go next card?
Yeah.
Oh, this is a beloved one.
Yeah, this one is probably the most straightforward of cards from UNR.
So this card is... Oh, should I...
No, go ahead.
This card is Merciful Eroda. It's a 3-mana 4/4 with Flying and Vigilance. So, obviously, very insane stat line. But its drawback is you prevent all damage that it would deal to creatures. So, this having flying means that as long as your opponent doesn't have a flyer, it doesn't really matter because it's just going to be murdering them very quickly if you play it on turn 3. You can also block with it, although it won't kill anything that you block. So in general, this is a very strong tool for aggro decks. If you just want to kill your opponent dead as quickly as possible. I think the fact that Pithbolt exists now means that this does kind of eat it to a lot of removal. So the 4 toughness doesn't matter as much except against red decks. So I think this card is less good in the meta now than it presumably used to be. But it's definitely still a really solid tool for many different kinds of aggro decks, and I think that people should probably still keep it in mind.
I think it's just, I honestly don't know that it's actually that bad. I think the two things that are holding it back are, one, I think, like, not having immediate value on a card in general kind of hurts. And two, I think people need to, like, I think you're right about it being, like, good aggressively. I think people need to, like, reframe where they're thinking of putting this card, because before it was kind of just, like, solely in mid-range, like or maybe aggressively oriented, but I don't think I've seen, like, any, like, white weenie style decks just try this as, like, hey, this is just kind of a good 3-drop.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was effectively soft banned while Intrepid was a 3-drop, because you cannot justify playing this if Intrepid is legal.
Fuck Old Intrepid. All my homies hate Old Intrepid.
Wait, I wonder if this would have been better in Pawblade than Champion of Destiny is.
Oh, that's possible, actually. This thing carries a sword like no one's goddamn business.
Yeah, actually, okay, I think I probably misbuilt that deck now. I think Euro would have been much better in that deck.
It's kind of hype in general to play this on turn 2 and swing on turn 3, which is something that you couldn't do with Intrepid. Like, that was the one argument that I made. But, like, you know, as Kay mentioned, like, green-white Arty study decks used to play this back in the day, or green-white X, as a way of just, like, closing out games, because one of the things you couldn't, like, mid-range decks generating value is good and all, but also you need to win the game eventually, especially versus combo decks. And Arty Study gave you so much gas that you could afford to play things that were just dumb beaters. Like, I think there's an argument for this being one of the better goifs in the format. But
yeah, it's a good comparison. It is essentially a goif.
Yeah, it would be cost radical, but it would still be a goif. Unless you guys have any other specific things to talk about this, I think my last point would be is that it is also one of our playable 3-drops with 4+ power, which is relevant if you want to play a Zera deck, because it's one of the few creatures that's actually good and can also enable the curve of Zera into Collar of Hunger into turn 3 4-powered let's go off kind of card. I haven't played it yet because I feel like Bloodjade Prophet and some of our other options have been better, but it's also just a really solid card. So.
Yeah. When you said 4 power, it made me think of curving this into I Choose You, which is such a meme.
Oh, God.
That's also, like, really funny.
I Choose You is going to happen.
Mostly a meme. All right. Should we go next?
Speaking of memes, shout out to Moonlight Sanctum, which has a GP win, but also I think was the worst card in that deck, was sided out every game, and I don't think Egg ever saw it in a game 1.
I saw it cast one time. It did nothing.
The other incredible thing is I'm pretty sure that this tech was retained in like the next build of Chop Shops that was played, despite the fact that the deck ran literally 4 white sources. And, like,
yeah,
I understand.
I mean, to be fair, it also had like Intrepid and some other. It had Intrepid.
Sure, but like your ability to cast this on turn 3 in that deck was functionally 0.
Yeah, I think it was really just like it does the taxing, and then it's like, no, it's just an awful card. Get me out of here.
I think this card is basically at its best in decks with a bunch of enchantments, which I know is controversial, where you can choose for it to either be good against combo, sometimes control, and also you can choose for it to be good against aggro. But I feel like it's kind of a clunky card in general. And
like you need to like leverage tax effects to actually like you either need like a clock, in which case like where is your enchantment based clock coming from, and you also need redundancy in your taxes to make it like actually work out, in which case I'm like what enchantment redundancy do we have with this?
So or you just play this and you play
like sometimes you just need to gain 1,000,000 life.
That is also but in that circumstance, shouldn't you have just been on Serene Prayer?
Yeah, because Serene Prayer is gain 10 life.
You do not need to run 5 copies of Serene Prayer, I swear to God.
Yeah, you need to run 8 copies.
Oh God. The one spicy thing I thought of with this card is I really want to see someone play this alongside Marin Polgak, because I think Marin Polgak is criminally
no.
underused in terms of comboing with obnoxious stack enchantments.
Oh, I built that EDH deck. It was very fiddly and very obnoxious.
I play my lock piece on turn 3, and I
Yeah.
play Marin, which curves neatly into Marin on turn 4 because now she costs 4 mana. And then turn 5 onwards, I'm just going to make a copy of this every single turn for the rest of the game.
Oh,
If
and
you're
you
an
wanted
aggro deck,
you wanted to
good luck.
interact with my thing that's pushing out tokens. Bad news. Too late. She's got hexproof.
There are a shocking number of enchantments in MSEM that make entire EDH tables rage quit when paired with Marin Polgak.
Yeah, I mean, this is unsurprising. Marin Polgak's activated ability being hybrid was literally for EDH because I
Yeah.
made her and I was like, oh, this seems like a fun general. I would like playing her. And I didn't really think much of it other than, yeah, she'd probably upset some people.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking
So now you know what kind of EDH player Pip is.
Yeah, it's true.
Speaking of cards that upset people, should we go to our next card?
Yeah.
For sure.
So Slapfield Workgate is a 1 mana enchantment. Whenever Slapfield Workgate or another enchantment enters the battlefield, you get a 0/2 Ox, and then it has 4 mana, return another enchantment you control to its owner's hand. You don't usually use that last ability in Constructed, but it's nice to have the option.
It's honestly just it's more nice to have around than you would think, and I think it was also previously part of. It used to be you can return any enchantment, but I think there was like some combo that you could do, and so it
like
would,
bouncing itself.
yeah, I forget what I think it was like something. I don't remember the exact thing. Pip can help me out here.
I like that this can't bounce itself because it means you actually need to build around it instead of this just being like a random like Ox generating factory.
Yeah, but like
at least
I mean, like I don't even know that this card makes people angry. It's just a really solid. It's like just like fuck your aggro.
It's
tool.
made me quite annoyed in the past when I'm trying to attack people with creatures and they just make like 20 Ox.
Just have evasion, forehead.
I mean, yeah, like if I
Just
had evasion in my deck, I would just slipstream.
Caillou, the thing you're thinking of is Slapfield Workgate also briefly was a combo enabler. So the older version of Elder's Wisdom used to untap 2 lands each time you cast a Destroyed spell.
That was it. So you just went infinite once you had some mana auras. Yeah, okay.
You went infinite, and also once you had enough mana, your opponent couldn't interact with you. Like they couldn't break up the infinite because every single one of your pieces could be bounced to your hand and replayed.
Yeah. So basically, it just gave them a way to kill the Workgate first and then kill something else.
I don't think I've ever seen something that I would describe as a fair Slapfield Workgate. Every single Slapfield Workgate deck I have seen is like kind of miserable.
I mean,
wait, I'm so confused because I feel like I'm just like this is like bursting my bubble here because every time I've like played with or against Slapfield Workgate, it just seemed aggressively fair. Like
okay, so
last time I was played was with turn 3 kills for Blues versus Featherfall deck.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that's that. Okay, so, but the Slapfield was not at fault there. I'm defending my Oxy boy.
Slapfield was 1 mana for like 5 or 6 bodies in that deck.
Yeah.
Well, see.
Oh,
okay.
sorry, Caillou. Like,
who is the thing that was making those 0/2s into like crazy powerful things for just free mana? You know, I'm gonna be.
I don't know. Also, just
I'm out here defending my boys.
Card, like, I actually think this card is low key kind of fucked up.
What? How is it's making 0/2s, people?
That doesn't really matter in Constructed. There are like so many ways to abuse that, and even in the right matchup, just spamming 0/2s can easily win you the game.
I feel like it stalls out games really nicely, but then like, I feel like versus lots of decks the tokens do like stone cold nothing, and you're just like, well, I've made decisions.
So the assumption is that if you're playing this card in your deck, you have a way to use the tokens.
Or I mean, you just board it out.
Yeah.
Or you board it out, or you just accept. Okay, well, let's make a bunch of useless 0/2 tokens, but also like it was a 1 mana enchantment that put some bodies on the field, and also I can spend 4 mana to like rebuy my other enchantments.
Yeah, and this gets back your dark bargains.
For paying 4 mana to bounce something, I feel like it's aggressively fair. I am not hearing this.
I'm not like okay. That's not the reason why it's good. It's just like the overall package of the card. I think it just does a whole lot in those strategies.
Yeah. I will say, as someone who has tried to, people have made like kind of Pogles isn't exactly the right word, but decks that suit up creatures with enchantments, unlike the Featherfall aesthetic decks, which kind of go wide, or who just have like that one turning at Whiterun card that's +1/+1 for each enchantment you control. And you would not believe how many times my creatureless control deck that does not give a fuck about attacking is like, oh well, they have a bunch of 0/2s, so 10 of my interaction spells don't work. Basically, any card
Is
that
this
beats
because you play
Exeunt is
Edicts?
unfair. Yeah, any card that beats Exeunt is inherently unfair.
Yeah, okay. You know what? There are
So,
lots of
to
there are
be
lots of
clear,
cards that
I'm
I've
not
played
saying
before
this
that I
card
will
is-
cop to being dumb shit. I feel like I'm gonna defend my Oxy boy till the day I die.
That's fair. Like, okay, I'm not saying this card is overpowered and needs a nerf. I think it is like definitely within reason for the MSEM format, and it requires build around. And it also does things that are cool. That doesn't mean it's not fucked up. Like fucked up, fucked up means something different. Like, I don't know. There are plenty of cards in MCM that are great, and I love playing with them, but they're also kind of fucked up.
And we're definitely going to be seeing a few more of those as we go down this list. Which,
Yeah,
speaking
yeah.
of, next up is another enchantment, Unbound Expanse. It's 1 and a white, and when it enters the battlefield, if an opponent controls more lands than you, create a colorless plains land token. And I know with Worlds Away being here, like land tokens seem like par for the course, but I think this was the first land token card added to MSEM, right?
That's probably true.
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, it definitely, and it caused a little bit of a stir at the time, so kind of an interesting piece of history. It also has a good secondary ability where you can sacrifice it to flicker your entire board. You don't get much control over what you flicker, which can definitely, or like, you can't like selectively flicker stuff, which can definitely screw you over, but it's also quite a powerful piece of backup to your white ramp spell that also provides enchantment synergies and can itself be flickered.
My experience with this card is you don't play it for the first ability. Like, the first ability is why it's playable, but you're not playing it as a ramp spell. The thing that makes this card good is specifically its synergy with Writing Wonders, where you can
Or like
put it in
Corporate
your
War.
deck. Yeah,
I mean,
you can
it's
put
like,
it in your deck as a very compact combo finish to your like Prison Enchantress deck.
Yeah, the annoying part though is
either
that like sometimes like
sorry.
because it resets those as well, you can get into situations where it's actively bad to flicker it. So there's like where like you will lose like counters by flickering your entire board because the net gain is just not there.
Yeah.
Okay, so you guys can tell me if you think this comparison is bullshit, but I think this is basically what happens. This card is to Ghost Away what Dark Bargain is to Sign in Blood. Does that make sense?
I think that it's a little bit more different. Dark Bargain is more cleanly Sign in Blood-esque.
So yeah, this card.
I think Ghostway is much worse. I think Unbound Expanse is so much better than Ghostway. Whereas if Dark Bargain and Sign in Blood were legal in the same format, I think both could see play.
Yeah, sure. My reasoning is that this is 2 mana plus 2 mana, and then you get 1 mana back with the planes. So quick math.
Quick maths.
2 plus 2 is 4. Minus 1 is 3.
Man's not hot.
Also, literally that.
Also worth noting, Ghostway is legal in MSEM, as is there's a blue Ghostway in MSEM as well, I think.
Oh, really? Yeah, I mean, this is just better than that though, because it's also just good to blink with, other copies of itself or other blink effects. So this is decent in multiples. Although, if you're getting used to this multiple times, you're probably less likely to, still have less lands than your opponent. So
See, this is where you bring in your land sack outlet.
Now we're cooking. Now we're hyper marrowing.
All right, let's get to blue.
Ooh, all right.
Ooh.
The first blue card is something that I hold very near and dear to my heart, which is a card I was really skeptical of when Hersey first registered it. Anti-Magic. So 1 in a blue for an instant, counter target spell that shares a color with mana spent to cast Anti-Magic. So the base mode here is Gainsay, if anyone is familiar with Gainsay. Also, if you are, why? If you are playing a bug deck, congrats. You now have access to counter target green spell and counter target black spell. MSEM as a format is a fairly like color balanced format. But I'm pretty sure if you look at some JPs, you can actually notice like, oh hey, if I'm in a bug deck, I can counter 80% of the spells I care about in this format. Well, other than the like, you would expect it math-wise to be 60%, I guess. So 80% isn't actually that scary. But
Particularly
besides
because
the
of
point,
the multicolor cards too.
yep, especially that, yeah. Where it got really stupid was in the deck I played this a bunch, which is in the Golden Glade control deck, where you went turn 1 Gilded Glade or the Northern Hide holdout, and turn 2 any land. And now with your 2 lands, you were actually representing 5-color anti-magic.
So just
really hard for
counterspell.
people to play around it. Yeah, it's really hard for people to play around it.
No, you don't play around it. I mean, yeah.
Well, the really funny thing was the number of times I was, saying, well, I have curving like basic forest, basic plains, and northern holdout, and my opponent's like, great, now I have to, respect hard counters. It's like, yep, you do.
Yeah. And I think even
Well, I think
now,
that-
like, there are definitely decks in which you can still, like, I played it in like 5-color instance, but I don't think you even need to do like such a dummy mana base for it to just put in work. You can, like, I think you can literally have like some triomes, and then just kind of if you're okay with being a little bit slow, still go ham with this card, and still
Yeah,
have
you
it
can
be
also
like
use it
literal
with-
counterspell.
You can also use this with Grove of Embers, which I know is a card that Pip likes a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't like even need to include off-color lands in your deck. And yeah, I mean, this is essentially the reason that people play 5-color instants in a lot of ways. I've seen like at least 3 people play it, including Caillou.
Yeah, I think my dream deck is a good deck which can run both anti-magic and demon worthy, basically. Though just pure coverage in terms of interaction. The
You're
dream.
only soft to basic lands.
Oh yeah. The only soft is Civ's cost, just doming me for 20. Thank you very much. But I'll gladly die.
One of the things to note is this card was recently put back on the map by Canterbury Egg in 5-color Hounds, which was a deck that I believe he only played for 1 league, but it was directly the precursor that led to the 5-color control deck that I played, because he realized, oh cool, we have this really stupid mana base, and being Egg, he immediately played it alongside a bunch of Hounds, and then just like anti-magic and cursory glance, and called it a day.
So that was put on the map recently?
Yeah, oh god,
That must have
recently,
been a while back.
that's like 9 months ago. Jesus
Yeah,
Christ.
okay,
He was
so
actually playing
don't-
Hounds.
don't-
It must have been,
don't-
like, right after that was
No, that was before Love Song entered the format. Oh my god.
Yeah, I think this was
Yeah,
before
sorry.
Dodger joined the format.
Quarantine getting to me a little bit there.
Yeah,
All right, next card.
for sure.
Oh, this is a Pip special, I think.
So, Dreadhorde Arcanist was just banned in Legacy, and I think now is a really good time to bring up the fact we have something very close to Dreadhorde Arcanist in this format. Definitely worse, but terrifyingly close. So, Arcane Duelist is 1 and a blue for a 2/1. When it becomes tapped, targeting a sorcery card near a graveyard with converted mana cost 1 exactly gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. So, how you play with this is you just run cantrips. You run Seek Prophecy. You run Scorch. You run a bunch of just good generic 1-mana spells, because 1-mana spells are good. They allow you to play
Yeah,
efficiently.
just play this with
And now-
Unceasing Flames and Plaxotl, Piari. Sounds like a
Sure.
good time.
And now
Okay.
your 2-mana 2/1 in blue is also effectively drawing you a card every time it swings. And that's how you bury people in card advantage and kill them. Unlike Dreadhorde Arcanist, it's a 2/1, so it's a lot more vulnerable than a 1/3. And it doesn't cast the cards for free, so it's not putting you up on tempo. But it's still a really absurd card, and especially because it's when it becomes tapped. If you have ways of tapping it that don't involve attacking with it, you open yourself up to a lot more value. So if there's a playable vehicle alongside it, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
Did I just find my Breaker of Cities card?
Oh god.
Oh
I've been
god.
looking for an
Finally
excuse to play
Breaker
Breaker
of
of Cities for a while. Maybe this is it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Wait, you do this Breaker of Cities, Devise Companions, or not Devise Companions, Self Replication. Boom.
Nailed it.
Nailed
That's a
it. Alright.
deck. Should clip it and ship it. But yeah, I think this is honestly criminally underbrewed with, and I'm hoping that just mentioning it gets more people putting their heads on it.
Yeah, I'll build a deck with this card. Honestly, didn't know it existed until recently.
I think it's worth it. You could even justify exploring it in some builds of blue-red burn if you have enough lava spikes.
Yeah. Maybe against removal light decks.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, enter the Labyrinth. This was a card that was advertised on Reddit fairly recently. For 3 and a blue, sorcery, bounce any number of target non-land cards, permanents with different converted mana costs to their owner's hands. If 7 or more permanents were bounced this way, you may cast spells without paying their mana cost until end of turn. So, this card at its base is 4 mana for 2-ish bounces, maybe 3 bounces if you're lucky. If your opponent curved out, you can cast this and basically uncurve them out, which is really funny. But where it gets really gross is if you're a deck that plays to the board. Because what you can do is you can end up engineering these situations where you're like, cool, on this board there's a 1-drop through 5-drop, there's a 6-drop, and, all you need is one more card, whether that's a 0-drop or a 7-drop. That's a really hard circumstance to engineer, to be absolutely clear. There's a reason this card hasn't broken up any GPs yet. But if you have this in your deck, you have a Sayasa in your deck, and you have an Archive Guardian in your deck, or any other way of rebuying into her sorceries, you actually exile your opponent's library.
Weren't you considering running this in Podlight for that reason?
Yeah, once Jan brought that up, I was like, wait, this card actually seems entirely hype. And again, given that the base case is 4 mana for a bunch of bounce spells, it's not the worst. Like, the floor on it is fairly high, and the ceiling on it is you win the game. So that sort of card is really exciting. The main issue is it's really hard to get into the board states where this does the thing. So you can't afford to run more than one copy. But it's definitely interesting. And I think probably could be explored more.
Mm-hmm. It's also just like, I think, emblematic both flavorfully and mechanically of UNR.
Absolutely.
Okay, next up we have Find Nothing. This is 1 and a blue, and if you've ever played Shadow of Doubt in Modern, this might seem familiar. This turn, players can search libraries, bring cards from outside the game into game zones, or move cards that began the game face down in the command zone out of the command zone. Basically as anti-puzzle box tech. And you draw a card. So this is actually, like, okay, let's just take like the base case of it. This can be a 2-mana instant speed Stone Rain that cantrips, which is also flashbackable by Cane Dancer. You can also, for fun, you can now stop people trying to first mate if they're.
Potentially.
It's a special action that doesn't use the stack. And there's a chance first mate gets reworked, but that's beside the point.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So.
But I will say MSEM has a pretty high percentage of tutors.
Yeah, so Epic Encounter and I'm just specifically talking about like the outside of the game stuff. Like Epic Encounter and Dreamsight Well still get fucked up. So
I mean, I don't think Dreamsight Well really minds.
Well, no, you can't stop me from shuffling in my stand unassailable. How am I going to win the game without my stand unassailable?
Now you draw 5 cards that aren't stand unassailable. How will you ever win?
Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think it just generally has like. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that it has upside, and I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, like this is just a better Shadow of Doubt, which is a playable modern card.
Well, at some point in time, was a playable modern card.
Yeah, yes, okay, maybe like you can, maybe it is now that the format got nuked. You know,
yeah, and I think that like obviously like, I think being Cane Dancerable and having like other perks like that, and also how, like, I've been talking for a while about how MSEM mana bases are kind of disgusting, and I think that if this sees more play, this could be a tool that kind of makes people like think twice or like mitigates that a little bit, and that would be kind of interesting to see.
Yeah, I think just to add on.
You go ahead.
Right, just add on to Kai's point real quick. If you're frustrated with the state of MSEM mana bases, like one thing you can do is there are plenty of tools to attack people's mana. Like you can run land destruction even in non-Ponza decks. You can run stuff like Blood Tide. You could run Starlit Rays. You can run Seagreen Null Mage. You can run this. Like there's tons of ways. You can also just run proactive strategies that punish them for losing.
Yeah, I
life
think
and
the
stuff like that.
aforementioned like Civ's cost is probably one
Yeah,
of the better.
that one's good
Yeah,
too.
but I think
Yeah.
that the thing is like it's a trade-off, right? Because I think that
Right.
like
Yeah.
if you're running land destruction, sometimes it can just be unless they're like a really greedy mana base, it can sometimes just be like, oh, okay, like you've traded one for one, but if you don't have a way to capitalize on it, it can be bad. But also like
Yeah.
civilization's cost style hitters can be put out of use by careful fetching because if you build your mana base right, you can fetch a lot of basics to stay on, even if you need to stay on curve with certain colors. So
I
Hmm.
do want to push back a little bit on that though, because in general, something that I don't think people notice enough on in MSEM is how our mana base force you to choose between slow or painful. And like choice is very powerful, but if you're a deck that makes both of those choices uncomfortable, the mana base looks a lot worse than or the mana base becomes a lot worse than it looks.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think that's what Dodger was saying with proactive strategies. If your opponent goes, turn one Banish Companion, you suddenly have a really big question, which is, do I shock in this fetch land to find a basic swamp so I can exeunt this creature, or do I play a tapped land and hope that not killing this creature is going to be fine?
Hmm.
I guess that example is kind of stupid because you take 2 damage either way. So yes, you should shock it in, but the general idea works.
Yeah.
Aggro decks have the ability to basically get a free bolt or 2 bolts off of their opponent's mana base, or force their opponent to play behind curve, which is usually enough to kill them. The other thing that's nice about Find Nothing, though, is you can cycle it. It's fail case if your opponent, like we were talking about Seagreen Null Mage and how your opponent can just like refuse to play into it. Find Nothing, it's like, okay, cool, you didn't play into this, so I'm going to just cycle it, which I think cycling is usually better than creating a 1-1, but I guess that depends on the rest of your deck. I think the other thing to keep in mind is there are some decks where casting this is also just the most painful negate you can cast. So casting this when Zira, Caller of Hunger is one of their creatures away is just the
Oh.
nuts.
Yeah.
If someone casts this when I cast What Lurks Beyond, it's gonna take me a while to move on from that, because negate effects on What Lurks Beyond already hurt to begin with. My opponent cantripping off that is just like the most why. I
Wait,
guess
should
What
this
Lurks
be the
Beyond
five mana DP deck?
also maybe, but What Lurks
Huh.
Beyond, I guess you can still retrieve the cards from your hand or from your graveyard, but
Yeah.
the chances of that working out are so low compared to the alternative.
Yeah.
okay, and I think with that we can move on to the next blue card. You want to take this one, Dodger?
Sure. So it's Patient Aether Mage. It's a 3-mana 1/2. Whenever you cast an instant spell during your main phase, copy that spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. It says copies there, but I think it should just be one. I don't know. But anyway, like getting to double your instants when you're casting them during your main phase is nice. The most easy to imagine scenario is if you're doing this with burn spells. Um, Besides that, like maybe there's this feels like a very open-ended thing. Um, Maybe there's some kind of combo you can do. I'm not sure.
So this card actually almost ate a nerf before it entered the format because we looked and realized that the entirety of Tokyo Storm, which was one of the 2 Storm decks back in the day, was instants. Like
Oh no.
all of the rituals were instants. Uh,
Oh yeah, this is really good with rituals.
Mystic Arts is an instant. A couple of the cantrips were instants. And this card looked like you go turn 3 this if you don't kill it, or like turn 2 scintillate into this. If you don't kill this, I'm probably gonna make like 10 mana and tutor 4 cards. That was scary.
Yeah.
But the JM pointed out that it's really clunky other than on that precise scenario, and it's incredibly vulnerable to removal. Which more or less convinced me not to bother testing with it, but maybe I should have done my due diligence there.
Mm-hmm. I also don't know how MSAM playable this is, but this gets real funky with what do you call it? Uh, Angel of Sucor, because I think I like the idea of like playing it with that and then just being able to go like, yeah, okay, all the instants that I want to cast on my opponent's turn, I can also now just cast on my turn and get big value out of. Thank you very much. and that way not really having to need this tap out versus instant type of gameplay. But yeah, in general, it's just a cool build around, and um, like there is a comment. What is it over here? Excuse me for a second. Where it wasn't on this card specifically, but I think it's emblematic of the set in general. Where I was like, "But it's a sexy, unique build around," frowny face, and Pip was like, "That's the entire set," and yeah, the even though it's cool and attractive, sometimes it just is not playable.
Yeah, I think tapping out on turn 3 to make a 1/2 is a really big sell. Because it's going to die to pretty much anything. So I don't know. It's risky for sure if you're running this in your deck. Maybe you can like unearth this and then go off.
No. Bad. Stop.
No. See, Dodger, you
All
you use Persevere because Persevere is an instant.
Oh yes, thank you, Caillou. Yeah.
And now we're really gaming.
Now we're gaming.
Let's talk about a mill common, because those historically are very playable.
Yeah.
Runescholar Scribe is 1 blue for a 1/2. ETB, target player mills 4 cards. This card, hey, milling 4 cards isn't actually usually worth a card. But if you have a bunch of stupid creatures that pop out from your graveyard when you mill over them, you become a lot more interested in running things like Thought Scour. And this being creature is exceedingly relevant because it helps your mediocre backup plan of just beating the face. And also, keeping your creature count high helps enable some other nonsense. Runescribe's Apprentice is not good in mill decks, but it is in limited, it's great in mill decks, especially with all of the self bounce that this set has.
Mm-hmm.
But in MSEM, its primary use has been in dredge-like decks. Although I think those days are past.
I mean, hopefully those days are past.
I mean,
The council has
honestly,
taken the council hasn't just kneecapped them; they've also cut them off at the ankles, hamstringed, just pulled the toes off. At this point, if Dredge is still alive, then we should just give up on MSEM.
We started by shooting them in the foot, and we're like, okay, well that'll help them start stumbling more. And then it turned out zombies don't stumble, so we had to take desperate measures. I wouldn't be shocked if. Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure I saw Hersey playing a dredge deck.
Oh, Road to Awe is fine. Yeah, Road to Awe is different.
Yeah, it didn't. It seemed like a deck that has to actually play lands and cast spells, so I'd have no problem with that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the main thing. I think we are very firmly past the days where you can mill 8 cards through a library and just generate 6 power for no reason.
Yeah.
But we're still within the days of putting cards in your graveyard is good because then you can reanimate them or cast them from your graveyard and do stupid stuff.
Very much so. And this being a creature means that you can, do your creaturey things where you sack it to stuff or you block with it or blink it or whatever. So yeah, good card. All right. Next card is an artifact called Seraphine Skips.
Pip was the big defender of this one, so I think.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so some people here have been haters, but Seraphina's Gift is 1 blue for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, target opponent gains control of it. At the beginning of your upkeep, draw 3 cards and discard 2 cards. So, okay, very important to understand. You don't want to give this to your opponent unless you have a very good plan of why exactly drawing 3 cards is a bad thing. In MSEM proper, there's not a ton of ways to really take advantage of that, other than Iakin, I guess. But I don't think you need to enable Iakin in that way. But with that in mind, you also can flicker it in response to the ETB, or animate it from your graveyard. And if you do that, congrats. Now you have draw 3, discard 2 at the beginning of your upkeep, which is a really powerful effect, and is worth putting a little bit of effort into. Apprentice Necromancer is a way of doing that in UNR Limited, and that card is probably good enough to see play in MSEM, especially with this synergy.
Oh, you can't Wandering Guard this.
Yeah. If you do give it to your opponent and have something that players can't draw more than 1 card a turn, Narset Part of Veil style, this starts just demolishing them. but I don't think we're likely to get any of those in MSEM soon. There was some concern in the discussions about does having this mean we won't get that, and the answer is no. This wouldn't be the card that stops me from adding Narset to the format. Narset would be the card stopping me from adding Narset to the format.
What if we get something like Word of Invention?
Oh yeah, this is hype with that. Actually,
Yeah.
I feel like we might have a Whir of Invention.
I know there's like Reinvent, but that only gets artifact creatures, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's some definite overkill ways of doing it that I would not recommend. But there's also like Cloudheath Sentinel, which is an Alara card that's a 4-mana 2/4 flying ETB. You can reanimate something.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of little ways of doing it. I don't think we're likely to get. Oh, you can also Tink Tools for this.
Oh, okay. Now we're cooking.
You could Tink Tools for this.
That's actually kind of good.
I feel like if you're Tinked, I don't know. I feel like.
Oh my god, you can Ayala's Concord for this.
That's
actually kind of huge.
The Concord one actually makes sense because I think like you're more likely to get use of it out of it over turns. Where like most tools decks I've seen, like
yeah. You should be doing more stupid things with Tinker's tools.
Yeah.
Find this. But I do think Ayala's Concord, this is a decent target. It's not the best target. I won't go on record and say that you should find this instead of finding Rain's Eye. But like, that's not embarrassing by any means. There's also there's Awakening the Dragon. That's a card that's eminently breakable.
Wait, I'm confused. Isn't Awakening the Dragon? Oh wait, no, never mind. Sorry, I was thinking.
You're thinking of Unleash the Dragon.
Yeah, I was thinking of Unleash the Dragon. I was like, what? Hold on, you're gonna have to map this one out for me. But yeah, I guess, but like it just feels like a lot of work, dog.
Okay, but it is a sexy, unique build around.
It is a sexy, unique build around. You know what? You got me there. I've been hoisted by my own petard or whatever. Okay.
All right. This is a U-card, Caillou, I think.
It is? Oh, it is! It's Sphinx of Ill Omens, baby! Okay. So in MSEM proper, I'll leave talking about this in MSEM proper to other people. What this is insane for is in MSEDH, this is just stone cold stupid because it saves you from like lots of the common combos that we've seen so far involve like direct damage either with fireballs or whatever, and you can just be like, okay, I'll give myself hexproof. You want to use removal? Nah, I'll just protect something else. The ETB is solidly good for either stopping opponent stuff, reusing your own ETBs. If you can flicker this to permanently keep something off the board. And I think my personal favorite is that if you use this in specifically a Tree of Wisdom deck, it's a really good discard outlet for that deck because you can just discard a bunch of cards and then just keep drawing through your deck while also protecting Tree of Wisdom and yourself in the process. But yeah, I think the main power just comes from that last ability, which is just so flexible. And I think in a blue deck, you're definitely going to have the card flow to enable the machine gun protection of it.
Yeah, it is pretty absurd how like it kind of just makes you impossible to interact with for the most part, unless everybody is pointing removal at you. Which kind of makes this like pretty much a board wiper bust card.
So I've actually registered this card in MSEM proper. The deck that I registered it in is a deck built around the card Manifest Memories, which this card just has all sorts of synergy with. So Manifest Memories is X white white. You get to create token copies of X creature cards in your graveyard, and then exile them at the beginning of the next end step. This is both a good creature to copy, a discard outlet to get targets that are stuck in your hand into your graveyard, and just generally, nuts. you can cast this. It's a 5-drop, so like that's totally feasible. Ultimately, that deck was bad because it chose to register a bunch of cards that it could actually cast, rather than just, reanimating nuts ETB creatures. Which was a cool angle of attack, but I think ultimately made the deck weaker. But I think this card definitely has legs in MSEM.
Oh, neat. Okay, good to know. Because I just saw this card and I assumed it was just the worst line of torrents, but
Yeah. I mean, I definitely did it before Sign of Torrents existed. But
okay,
hey, it can hit permanents, so that's a pretty big deal compared to Sign of Torrents, which
So now
can't
you can
bounce
still bounce
lands.
their lands, yeah.
Yeah.
Why, yes, I would like to reset your Monument of Queens. Why'd you ask?
Cool, yeah. So the next card is Titan of Lake Basil. It's a 7 mana, 7/7. When it ETBs, you untap up to 4 target permanents, and it has pay 4 mana, draw a card. I think we just wanted to mention this real quick because it's the kind of card that can go infinite if you have something that can, like an activated ability that's like pay 4 or less mana, blink something. So that's kind of like just an interesting piece for combo decks, or as like a part of a pod chain or something. I don't know. Maybe someone else had more to elaborate on it, but that's all I got.
No, I think that sums it up pretty well.
Cool. This card's also absolute limited bomb, by the way.
Oh yeah, shout out to the draft where I drafted 3 of these.
Oh my goodness.
That
I don't
sounds
think
immoral.
you can even afford to run 3
Yeah,
of
it
them,
was.
to be honest.
The sad part was, okay. So the point was, it was supposed to be huge, like blue green ramp, and I was like, damn, okay. And like I think my first pick, it was like first pick Titan of Lake Vasile, pick 2 piece of ramp, pick 3 Titan of Lake Vasile, and then I was like, I'm set. Let's go. And then I didn't see a single piece of ramp for the rest of the draft.
No.
So, but
Big sad.
but you know what? It was still a sick deck, so I'll take it. Yeah, speaking of sick decks, our next card, Collector of Histories, is one of those cards which makes for, I think, very cool deck, but just has not seen a lot of play. It's just whenever a token creature you control dies, each opponent loses 2 life, which you can absolutely blitz through opponents' life totals if you want to use this as a Blood Artist variant. The problem is most of our Aristocrats decks have seen at least a healthy mix of token and non-token, so it's not like it hasn't really found its time to shine quite properly. Yeah.
The main thing to
Yeah.
keep in mind is, like, this is probably worse than some of our Blood Artists, unless your deck is, like, super heavy on tokens. But 2 life is a lot more than 1 life. Especially when you're looking to get 5 triggers off something. Like, dealing 5 damage to someone versus dealing 10 damage to them is a night and day difference.
Mm-hmm.
Don't view it as dealing 1 more damage, view it as dealing double the damage. One thing that I'm really interested in exploring with Collective Histories at some point is Grim Botanist, which is another incentive for Aristocracy decks to be more token based.
Oh, this can go in that Grim Botanist combo deck I made.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, you can even do the Mortal Will combo with this too, kind of. Like, it doesn't really work as well as Grim Botanist, but it still does a bunch of damage. Because it counts itself if it's also a token.
Yep.
Yeah, alright, cool. Next card is Exiled Necromancer. Let me just pull that one up real quick.
And this one was a card that
it
was
is
not on my radar initially. But yeah, take it away, Dodger.
Yeah, so it's a 3 mana, 3/1. When it enters the battlefield, you can return target permanent card with converted mana cost 1 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, which includes lands. So this can kind of do a shitty Sang Jin impression already, which is kind of sweet. But it can also get back 1-drop creatures. I think that having this around is like a way to be kind of tricky. You can even get back your Dark Bargain if you really want. So I think this is the kind of thing like where when the stars align, maybe this is like the perfect conclusion for your deck. But otherwise, there are probably cards that do what this does better.
It reanimates Seraphina's Gift. Just saying.
That's true.
I feel like it. I don't know. I feel like there's decks where this can do work, just because like convert mana cost to 1 or less. Like giving the ramping portion is like, okay. Like there's an easy fail case for this. So I don't know. I would not count this out. I thought you would be high on this Dodger, especially as the unearthed guy. Though I guess the
Oh, I
thought
do like it.
is
Yeah, no,
that
I mean, I like the card. I'm just not sure it's better than the other options.
like Sangjin or whatever.
I think so. Sangjin's strengths are it's green, which is a pretty big upside. It has the second point of toughness, which isn't a big upside. It has flash, which is huge, and it can grab from your opponent's graveyard, which is Um, Exiled Necromancer's upsides are it can reanimate dorks, which is whatever, and it can potentially reanimate some other like neat little utility rocks that you run. I don't think it's great, but I think there's something to it. Also, something that I've been thinking about with this because I play too much of canon formats. This can also reanimate Coldgrave. Like you can use your Coldgrave, nuke your opponent's yard, play Exiled Necromancer, return Coldgrave. Like that's a decent tech to have.
Yo, you can return your Silent Wanderer after it trades off with their Silent Wanderer.
Oh,
So true.
Hmm. But yeah,
All right.
okay. Next up, we have Frostfall Hunter, another graveyard-based card which also initially slipped my radar. It's black and a black for at the beginning of your upkeep, mill a card, but whenever you cast a spell from your graveyard, create a 2/2 green wolf creature token. And oh man, how, like, if we still had old Departed Evangel, this would be absolutely nuts, but this is still quite good with some of our other, like, I guess still Departed Evangel. Um,
Definitely still go with the Fire Advantage.
yeah, I
All
think,
you need
like,
is a sec outlet.
yeah. Like, unfortunately, Shadowban Console and other cards like that, which return from graveyard to the battlefield, don't work with this, but it's still, I think it's just still a really powerful engine if you build around it. So, I'm, I'm hoping that people, like, try to use it.
Yeah, it's there's also Through the Ashen Gate, which we'll get to in a bit. There's a couple other cheap flashback cards. I don't know. I feel like this card it needs things to go right to be good, and it's very much like a incidental value card that doesn't provide much incidental value on its own, which is kind of a tough sell. But if you put it in the right deck, maybe it's good enough.
Yeah, like I think it's it's a card that like has synergies in two different ways that kind of suggests it wants to go into the kind of deck I might build. Um, but and I have looked at it before, but I think it's just a little too restrictive in what it can actually do. So like I haven't ended up including it in any of my decks, but in the future, maybe there's something funky you can do with this. If you get another card that's like Departed Evangel, that kind of bolsters the number of cards that go off with this.
Tide Hollow Lich.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, that costs 4 mana to do, so it's a lot worse, I think. But maybe Denithra Champion, kind of. Not. Oh wait, I forgot that's getting changed, so it's no longer a cast. Big sad.
Mm-hmm. So yeah,
All right.
a little bit harder to
Next card
enable
is
than looked at first glance, but still cool.
yeah.
Okay, Pip, you want to take the
Next
next
card
card?
is
Oh, oops.
Guardian of Dusk. It is a 2 mana 2/2. It gets +X/+X, where X is the amount of life you've lost this turn. And when it has power 13 or greater, you sacrifice it. You must sacrifice it, and if you do, you gain life equal to its power. Honestly, this card seems kind of nuts to me. Not gonna lie. Like
It's kind of really sexy with Kevther as well.
So
I don't think you need to different to make this card good. Like you just need to play a shock fetch, and like
No, but I mean, like, it's all. I think it's also sexy with Kevther as well. You don't need it, but
This does help you do Kepler's Will a lot because like it kind of lets you pay the first 14 life for free if it's out.
Okay. So quick straw poll.
Yeah.
Dodger, have you ever played against this card?
Yeah, I have. I played against.
How much damage? How much damage is the most you've taken in one hit from it?
0. I played against Faye, who was on the Herald of
yeah.
Oblivion deck,
Yeah,
and I
that-
just kind of killed him, so it wasn't really.
All right,
I don't know.
Caillou, how much damage have you taken from Guardian in a single hit before?
2.
Okay, I have taken 11 damage from a Guardian in a single hit before, and I'm still not really sure how Augur did it, but that game went very poorly for me.
Oh Lord. But I see, that's the kind of thing that you see. That's the kind of thing you can do with Will. You just pump it up to 11, and then main phase 2, you just kill them with burn, easy.
Maybe this is another thing you want for the kind of like Sukar / Ink Summoner deck.
I mean, I think that deck used to be real, just like in terms of just Sultan of Avarice, Guardian of Dusk, and like Departed Evangel, and like one or two other little things. And that was before it got Banished Companion and other payoffs. That deck's probably good. I think legitimately at this point you need to like make sure you don't put in too many payoffs though, because I think it's really easy to accidentally do that.
That deck has so many small creatures in it. I kind of want to splash for Theocracy. Is that
you want to splash for what?
Theocracy.
Sorry. Oh, Theocracy. I don't entirely hate that.
As long as you can make
but
it
also
work.
without splashing, you can just run Unearth. Also, I'm not sure you're allowed to call something splashing if it has 2 pips in its cost. Just being clear here.
No, because the only card of that color you're running. That's a splash. That's a splash in my book. I mean, I don't know. Like,
Yeah, this is a card that I'm hoping people will break. That's my final opinion on it.
Yeah, I mean, this card is definitely breakable. The ability to this is probably the closest thing we have to a true Death's Shadow. I might be wrong on this. Like, you could maybe say Herald of Oblivion is closer.
Yeah, I think Herald of Oblivion probably is closer, but I think the truth is both of them are pale imitations of Death's Shadow.
Yeah.
But I think Guardian of Dusk at least is bringing something interesting and new to the table, whereas Harry kind of isn't.
Yeah, Herald is mostly used as a way to like combo with cards that happen to abuse it, like Soulblade.
Yeah.
Okay. I think the next card is one of the most straightforwardly strong ones in the set. It's Prying Inquiry. Doesn't see as much play these days because I think the format has also sped up a little bit more to the point where you need turn 1 hand attack, but it's still very registerable and like a very strong card. It's 1 and a black for just straight non-land hand attack. You lose 1 life, which usually isn't relevant, but can make this. It can definitely do the Thoughtseize thing where you're like, oh man, I'm playing against burn, god damn it. But it investigates, which suddenly when your hand attack is not just card neutral but also card vantage, suddenly it's kind of really good. Who would have guessed? But yeah, this card was kind of terror in like control and mid-range decks. It's also still a very good sideboard piece.
I think this card's still good. I think just people don't play it.
I'm 4-0 with 3 copies of this in my GP main deck, and I've cast this against aggro decks, and it basically has won me games versus those aggro decks. Having the ability to interact with your opponent in a 2-for-1 manner at such cheap costs is absurd versus aggro decks, and is how you get to turn the corner and stabilize.
Yeah, fair.
At a game where I went turn 2 Prying Inquiry, took their 2-drop. It was in my recent game versus Tumbles. And I just need to hope my opponent break. And then turn 2, I was able to cast a second Prying Inquiry plus Duress to just strip them of like their 2 remaining 3-drop threats. And my opponent was put in a situation where they just like had anemic beats. I was able to, kill their board. And then when both of us were top decking, I had an extra 2 clues to burn through. And every single way you can find little ways to bake in that sort of flood mitigation into your control decks is just how you build powerful control decks that draw enough lands and then don't draw too many.
Yeah, and I think that having I just mean like having a piece of hand attack for your control deck that isn't inherently a dead draw in late game top deck is huge for your deck's consistency.
I've seen so many instances of people, mostly Hersey, cycling this for 4 mana, where it's just like, all right, we're in the control deck top deck wars. I'm just going to spend 4 mana to immediately play this, crack it. I know you have nothing in hand. I've seen people get targeted with 0 cards in their hand. and just the clue just immediately getting cracked. I think the other
Yeah.
thing to keep in mind is it's single density. Like, this card is so easy to splash.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I remember when,
Might
like,
be worth
because it
it
originally
pretty
didn't have the
quick.
you lose one life rider, and then when that happened, I was like, well, okay, I guess that's a nerf, but it also just like doesn't do much because in most of the matchups where this card is you're like really like gassing up with this card, like the one life never becomes relevant. It's
It
just
makes it more of a risk to run in the matchups where it's not great, which
mm,
is namely the
it's
aggro matchup.
yeah, but as Pip just
Yep.
mentioned, you if they're not just like straight haha lava spike
I
type
mean,
aggro, you can really like piece them apart and take out their you take out their like most difficult to answer threats.
Yeah, I mean, it's not
to,
useless there, but it's definitely worse.
I don't know if I actually boarded it. No, I boarded it back in the game 3 because I realized it was not as bad as I thought it was.
I mean,
But
if you're
it
on the
is,
play, it's probably better, but on the draw,
yeah, if
I
you're on
think
the play,
it's not great.
I agree. On the play, it's better. It's also better than Duress versus creature decks, as a no-duh sort of moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do think something that is overlooked is a lot of MSEM's most playable hand attack has blind spots that it misses, and Prying Inquiry doesn't really.
Yeah, Prying
And that's
Inquiry is
one of the
honestly
reasons
kind of a
it's
fucked up
awesome.
card.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
I agree.
And
Yeah.
like
In
I've been
in
very
good
happy to
Slapfield
see
Workgate.
less of it. Let's just put it that
Yeah.
way. As someone who usually likes to register either like straightforward combo decks or grindy control, I'm like,
And this
yeah,
feels
it's
like a card that
cool.
you would love to play, kind of, right?
I mean, probably.
If the answer is anything, it has a backup plan. It's consistent. It's a control card.
Yeah, I guess I
Tough
just
love.
usually like I'm usually more of a stack interaction than hand attack
I see.
type of
I see.
control deck. But
Okay.
you know, when I return to Obzon Heart Attack, I will definitely be sleeving up a few of these.
Sweet.
But yeah, next up is I think we're back. We're back from the generically good cards to the oh man, it's the Dredge Breaker. It's Putrid Lurker. So this is 2 and a black for Death Touch 3/1, and you know how it says you may whenever you discard Putrid Lurker or another card, you may play black. If you do, return Putrid Lurker from your graveyard to the battlefield. Yeah, it's just so it's basically just like um, it was a 1 mana 3/1 Death Touch, so kind of disgusting.
So the context you would use this in is with the now banned Torment lands. You would play it, discard Putrid Lurker to the Torment land, and then since you now have an untapped land that can produce black, you just tap that to effectively make this a 1 mana 3/1. This card also used to have haste, and it was nerfed before the Torment lands were eventually banned. I actually remember, like, I think Chumbek was the one who discovered this interaction, and he was posting about it, like, in deck building, was like, oh, does this work like I think it does? And someone was like, yes. And then he just posted Devious Cat. 5 seconds later, 5 seconds later, there's a at league ping, and I hop in, and then we get into game, and Chumbek drops a 3/1 Death Touch Chase on turn 1 and smacks me. I look at my hand, and I'm like, oh, I am definitely not going to win this game.
I would like the record to reflect that in the version of Unraveling that was selected via the wildcard vote, Putrid Lurker not only had haste, it also didn't cost anything to return to the battlefield.
What the fuck?
Oh no!
I think we got a month in before that changed, and it involved just another nerd just crushing me by activating Planar Market repeatedly and discarding
Wait,
two.
wait. So like
Yeah.
actual factual bizarre style dredge?
Yes.
Oh boy.
Like,
Oh man.
2 mana, discard 2 3/1s into play. Oh, by the way, if you ever kill them, it literally does not matter. And we didn't have playable exile removal back then, so get fucked.
Oh, that's so spooky.
Oh, that's. I'm very glad I missed this part of history.
But in general, like, in terms of raw power level, this card's still there. Like, even without haste, even with paying mana, there's so many ways for this to turn discard into. It's not that it turns discard into upside per se, but it means you no longer taking card disadvantage off discard. And the other important thing to remember is it's not just discarding this. If you mill over this and then cast a looting, you can pop this back onto
Yeah,
the
I think
battlefield.
if it was just a madness cost, it would not be that great. The fact that it's so flexible is what makes it like a real killer.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. All right. Next
Speaking
card
of
is
another card that's very flexible,
a card that I think a lot of people have issues with, and I would not be surprised to see it changed eventually.
I mean, I think that it's.
I think its days are numbered personally, but the card in question is Sadistic Indulgence. It's a 1 mana enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you create 3/1/1 white human creature tokens with this creature can't attack or block. And the enchantment has pay 1 life, destroy target permanent you control. So this card has done a bunch of different things, even recently. Most notably, it was used as a way to get 4 permanents in El Makino's Turbo Jarl's Brutalizer deck. And it was also used as a way to enable this kind of like black-red City or Land second deck that was run in the GP and thoroughly crushed Pip. Pip, do you have any thoughts on this card or that deck in general?
See, my thought is actually
Yeah,
this
I
is.
mean, this is a card. Sorry, this is a card that in general, like when I first saw it, I was like, yeah, this is a card that's for smarter people than me. And I feel like I've been proven right. Where every time someone puts this in a deck, I'm like, I think Sadistic Indulgence is actually a really good canary in the coal mine. Where if it shows up in a deck, something fucky is happening. Something not okay is happening. Like Sadistic Indulgence isn't a card that does anything unless you have a synergy piece. But then usually once you put it together with like just one synergy piece, it just becomes so obnoxious.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this
Especially
is really
since,
good
like,
with Unbound Expanse because once you start having more lands than your opponent, you can actually sacrifice them so that you can keep getting
oh
lands.
shit, we did it. We broke MSEM again. Man, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
like,
this
I don't
card's a
know.
really good reason to add balance to MSEM.
Yeah, this feels like the kind of thing that whenever it's being used, it's not for anything particularly fair. Like I thought the Brutalizer deck was fine. Like that deck has some pretty
Yeah,
somewhat clear
I think it's
counterplay.
kind of annoying when there's cards which are just like, I think, not interesting and also only used for unfair things. I think that this,
Yeah.
I think it's true that this enables unfair things, but I think all the times that it has done so, it's done in ways where I can appreciate the deck building that goes into it. And that obviously
So
that
one
doesn't.
thing we
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Sort of. Yeah. Yeah.
one thing we haven't seen yet is that this is also a pay life outlet. One thing
Oh yeah.
that's really elegant about this design that I'll give Jan a lot of props for is it's a way of adding a free sack outlet, a free pay life outlet, and a card that's not just utterly useless to your limited. And this card has a lot of different really weird uses in this limited. You can actually use it to blow up the blight tokens that some of the black commons, or one black common and one black rare, give you.
Right.
But you could also use it to, pay 9 life into Garnier of Dusk to not one shot your opponent, but deal them 12 out of nowhere. Or 11, sorry.
Right, because you can just target the same permanent over.
Yep. And, you can just target the same human 9 times. If we
Yeah.
ever had a deck that allowed you to, like, swap life totals with your opponent, this is a great way to go down to 1 life out of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
The main issue is it's not a good card on its own, but... Oh, remember how we were talking about... Oh, no, that doesn't work. I was like, remember how we were talking about how Unhallowed Concordant allows you to arbitrarily pay life? Maybe this, and then this doesn't do anything. this just allows you to pay life for no reason. So disregard that plan.
Yeah. Yeah, card good. Okay. Next up, we have Through the Ashen Gate. This is very straightforward. Pay 1 black at instant speed to investigate. But what's that? It has a free flashback to investigate again? Because life isn't a cost.
Yeah,
But
so
yeah, speaking of cards that do a lot in limited.
So this does a lot in limited, a lot of little things it checks the box of. It's also seen MSEM play in Jan's Heart Collector deck, which was a blue-black villainy list featuring Union Rail Strikebreaker and Selene the Cruel. And this card was a big piece of tech that Jan brought to the archetype that, I give him massive props for, because it's never I've never considered it. and it gives you the ability to say, cool, Villainy will gain me back to 2 life. So now just in my graveyard, I have a 0 mana shock sitting around that I can spend at instant speed. And that's a really difficult thing to play around, by the way.
Yeah, a little bit.
Or 1 black for 4 damage to anything.
It even draws you a card if you spend 2 more mana. So like with the Sling the Cruel as well, and it gives you stuff to stack to Sling in, like pretty crazy. Yeah, like it just does. I think this is the kind of card that's like a very good synergy piece for multiple different things, whether it's artifacts, milling yourself, or casting cheap spells.
Okay. So who wants to take the next card?
I got it. Next up is Wave of Decay. It costs X and a black. It's a sorcery. You can only spend black mana on X. And it's up to 2 target creatures, each get -X until end of turn. You gain X life.
Also, I'm very sorry because I can't believe that... See, Dodger, I can't believe that I asked who should take this card. I wasn't looking at the list. But this is... Yeah. I should have given this one a Pip because this is a big Pip card.
Kind of like...
So the funny thing is, this is actually not a card I've ever registered. When I was playing Villainy, this was a card that was a big miss because I totally forgot it existed. And it's something that Augur actually brought to the archetype. And it ended up having to get nerfed because it's one of the things that I think contributed to Villaony's Reign of Terror. Originally, and Caillou, this is within your time, but way before Dodger's time, this didn't say up to 2 target creatures. This said creatures you don't control.
Yeah, it was kind of fucked up. So it basically, the thing was, like, Villainy and Exit could take care of lots of small stuff, and if they ever, and you could, like, stack it to kill single targets, and if they ever got too uppity by bringing a bunch of small creatures, you were like, Wave of Decay, you're dead.
Yeah. This was also back in the day where Villainy didn't have the first time per turn clause, so Wave of Decay, X equals 2, kill 3 creatures, gain 2 life, then draw 3 cards and lose 3 life. There's no way you can actually beat that. And Wave of Decay was a card we identified as, this is a very overtuned card. And even though eventually we also need to tune down Villainy slightly, my thesis at the time, which I stand by and I think time has proved me correct, was Villainy as a card and Exeunt as a card have weaknesses and angles of attack that you can, take them out with. The issue is that Wave of Decay just neatly closes up all of those. And also, Wave of Decay was just one more card that deck could run that it could just effectively cycle for a shock. Since every single spell that Villainy gets run that it can just run as face burn is a huge deal.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And next up, we have the last black card. It's Wither. So this is 1 and a black for an instant. Target creature gets -6/-6 until end of turn. But you make a blight token, which is one of the things we were referencing earlier with Sadistic Indulgence. But yeah, I think this was definitely back when Unraveling came out. It was like, yo, instant speed black removal that could hit most things in the format? These days, I think that our removal speed has improved enough that I think that, I don't know, if you guys disagreed and I'm missing something, feel free to tell me. But I feel like this card has mostly been obsoleted in recent times.
I don't think I'd run this unless I cared specifically about the life loss or about the enchantment. You need a way to turn that drawback into a benefit.
I would agree with that, and I would also add and say, like, I don't think caring about the life loss is enough. I think I need to actually care about the token itself.
Yeah, that's probably true.
But in a deck like Corporate War, maybe.
Yeah, why not?
But I don't know. I think this card is a really neat and elegant design. It does kill a lot of things. It kills them agnostic of toughness. It kills specific things. I think it fits really well into... It's one of those cards where... UNR is a really weird set because I think simultaneously it has some cards that are just so cool and so open-ended, you can only put them in Eternal formats because they don't do anything in Standards. But it also has some designs like this where it's just like, man, I wish this was in the Standard because I love the idea of how this influences Standard playable threats. Like, what does a Standard with this look like? And it's also it's removal that's bad against burn. And I always think when burn is the best second standard, that's usually a healthy thing.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, when MSE curated standard when?
Interesting.
Yeah, both of you council members get on that. But okay, next up we have our first red card. Dodger, you want to take it?
Sure. So this is Blood Cult Covenant. It's a 2-mana enchantment. At the beginning of each end step, if an opponent lost life this turn, you can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. And then you can also sack the Covenant and sack a creature to deal, to fling it basically. So it has a free fling associated with it that you can cash in whenever you want, which is kind of valuable in itself because it kind of can invalidate your opponent's removal, make things difficult for your opponent in combat, etc., etc. I understand that this card was once part of a turn 3 kill with Vidal.
Shh, Pip didn't want to talk about banned cards.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm just joking. But yeah, it was Vidal, which is another card from this set, which got banned. It basically went through your deck and found an enchantment with conveyor mana cost 2 or less, I believe, and then dropped onto the battlefield. So you basically, I think you ran like Blood Cult Covenant and like Kinken, and then you just killed your opponent on turn 3.
Sounds fun.
I do wonder if Blood Cult Covenant still has any legs in the format now. I assume the answer is no, but I haven't seen anyone mess around with it. It's a pretty decent fling, and it's a fling with upside if you need to cast earlier. One of the issues with fling traditionally is, it's really easy to get 2 for 1 when you cast your fling and they counter it, which is an issue that Blood Cult Covenant has unless they Seabree null mage you, in which case, congrats, they wanted it more.
Yeah.
But in terms of it providing constant value, that hits the other issue that you have with fling, which is it rots in your hand. So I don't know. Maybe this has legs. Probably not in MSEM though.
I think it's probably just the best fling available if you need a fling, but it's like fling isn't really what you want. I would say.
Okay.
Like
so,
if you have a giant creature you want to kill them with, you can just fetch Bold River and then haste it out, right? But anyway,
yeah, Pip, you want to take the next card? Pip?
Yeah. Given that I was the one that stands for this particularly hard. Okay. So Cackling Tormentor is the next one on the list. It's 1 red for a 1/3. Whenever 1 or more cards are put into an opponent's graveyard from their hand or library, it deals 2 damage to any target. And its flavor text apparently is meant to be a trolley problem reference. So people in MSEM are addicted to this idea of maybe we can make Lantern Control viable. And consistently forgetting the fact that Lantern Control was viable in Modern A when it had Mox Opal, and B because Ensnaring Bridge exists. Because the most important thing you can do while controlling the top of your opponent's library is also control their board state so they don't just kill you while you're sitting around fiddling with your Lantern of Insight and tapping your Codex Shredders.
Yeah.
Cackling Tormentor serves a similar role to Ensnaring Bridge. It's much more easily removed, but every time you mill your opponent, you get to shock something. That can be their creatures. That can be their planeswalkers. It also acts as a win con once your lock is established. So, I don't know. Most of the decks that I've seen Cackling Tormentor show up in haven't been particularly impressive, especially because usually there are lightning rod issues where your opponent, it's the only creature you run, and it's your lock piece, which means if your opponent runs any removal at all, it just bites a removal spell immediately and dies. But if your opponent doesn't, it can do some messed up things. So, I don't know.
I think it feels like the kind of card that if you happen to have a combo that can make your opponent mill like a bunch of cards like 1 by 1, then maybe you can use this to one-shot them. But I don't really like the idea of running this as just like a card that happens to be like a good card TM in your specific deck, because odds are you're running a bunch of bad cards to make this worth it.
One other kind of neat thing is it is a 2-mana Magrim. It does proc off of discards, but it also procs off 1 or more, so you can't use it with Mind Rots or Wheels. You have to use it with individual discard spells, which is a little rough.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Next card is Crack Open the Cache. It is a Shatter variant. You get to choose two between destroying an artifact, looting once, or investigating. I think the base case of just being a 2-mana Shatter that investigates is like kind of neat. And if you have mana to spare and you really need to kill artifacts, then this is something to consider. Sometimes being able to loot stuff is relevant too, in case you have graveyard synergies or you want to a specific card in the graveyard for flashback mirror. I don't know, like could be any number of things. And it's nice that this is also just not a dead card. Like if your opponent doesn't have any artifacts, you can always just loot and get a clues to make this like a mini Wheat from Chaff kind of.
Yeah, I mean, it's doing the thing that Wilt does, right? Worse than Wilt does, obviously, which is something I'll probably bring up a bunch during the Elmari review. But the fail case of this is you loot and draw a card. And it turns out when you staple that to an answer, that's a very powerful effect. Not to mention the kind of Kolagon's command mode of blow up your artifact, draw a card. It's a card that sees plenty of MSEM play. I'm pretty sure it's on the staples list, and for good reason. But one thing that's weird is MSEM very rarely has a density of artifact decks, and usually the artifact decks that are popular are go wide artifact strategies rather than have a single artifact that I must keep in play.
Yeah.
So shatters are less good than naturalizers or disenchants. But it's I think this is a really simple design and it's a very good card.
Yeah. Agreed.
Okay, moving on to the next one. It's Devouring Flame, aka was once part of a turn 2 combo deck. It's 1 red for menace. Sacrifice a creature, it gets +2/+0, but it's normally an 0/2. So there used to be a way that you could endlessly loop a 1-drop on turn 2 so that you could get this up to infinite power. Well, actually not infinite, because you would be losing life each loop, but enough power to just kill your opponent on turn 2. Now the question is, what are the I guess more fair use cases of it that still exist? What do you guys think?
Well, I think it's not a bad aristocrat-ish thing for an extremely aggressive-oriented tokens deck or aristocrats deck. Like, it's a sack outlet that you can use to chuck a creature at your opponent's face, and it only costs 1 mana. So,
I want to highlight that 1 mana point a lot because 1 mana is a very magical number because we have this card named Egg of Avarice. And while we do have another really powerful 1 red sack outlet in the form of Autumnal Watch, Autumnal Watch is much more of a grindy card, whereas this is much more of a kill you dead card. So, depending on what you're looking for, this card is still good. It just is a very narrow deck that it goes in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Very, very powerful though. If you do manage to enable it.
Yeah, speaking of very powerful if you manage to enable it, our next card, Dragon Gate. So, 1 and a triple red, but for good reason. Whenever an artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you create a whole ass 4/4 dragon token.
Yeah, this card has so many ways to use it in the MSEM format. Custom designers really love their artifacts that sack. And so there's tons of investigate cards that are playable. There's tons of cards that make treasures or treasure likes. There's tons of cantripping artifacts and ways to sacrifice them.
Shout out to when this was part of one of the cards that got Enteraki Dryad banned. Or it wasn't the reason that Enteraki Dryad got banned, but it was the payoff in the combo deck. Enteraki Dryad is 1 GG. Whenever you draw a card, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and you can remove a counter to make a treasure. So this was one of the win cons that deck ran, because there was a card which basically allowed you to cantrip every time, or sorry, not cantrip, allowed you to loot every time an artifact was put into your graveyard. So you just went infinite with that in Enteraki Dryad. And then while doing that, just Dragon Gated to kill them dead.
So I haven't played as much Unraveling limited as you do. Have you experienced this in limited? Have you encountered this alongside investigate cards? Because every time I think about this card, I just think about how tilted I would be if my opponent like cracked open the cache or like did some other like basic things on turn 2 and 3. Maybe played a Sadistic Indulgence turn 1. I was like, okay, what's going on over there?
Yeah.
And they cast Dragon Gate on turn 4. Just like immediately ended my entire draft career.
Yeah, no, I've never experienced this, and I hope never to.
Yeah. I will say I have run this in 2 separate league lists, both of which placed. Both of which were like blue-red artifact decks. I think the more powerful version was the one that went all in on casting Fateful Eruption, although that deck no longer works as well because 11th Hour Breakthrough was banned. But I think like you can run 4 currencies and 4 Lotus Studies, which do a lot for helping you not only cast this early, but also giving you easy ways to get free 4/4s. In a lot of matchups, you side in a card called Cower's Tithe, and if you have Cower's Tithe and Dragon Gate in play, it's impossible for those decks to beat you, more or less, because every time they cast a non-creature spell, you're getting a 4/4 flyer.
And notably, the 4/4 flyer is coming in on their end step, or whenever is the least convenient for them to fight it.
Exactly. Yeah. I think this is a card. This is another card that I feel like its days are numbered. Honestly, like it's so powerful when you take advantage of it, and there are already a lot of tools to do so. That I feel like eventually we'll get to the point where that deck just kind of fires on all cylinders, and it doesn't lead to the greatest gameplay. So we may need to tweak it a little bit. But like, this is a really cool design, and it is fun to play.
It's a straightforward UNR rare, which is
Yeah, I was gonna say it's basically every single card in UNR. Well, there's been a couple of exceptions, but if you notice, most of the rares that we talk about, it's like, well, if someone ever figures out how to really take advantage of this, we're probably gonna have to do something. But I think it's really important to acknowledge that JN was, in addition to being a very solid limited designer, was probably the best player that MSEM has had. And when he designed all the UNR cards, especially the rares, the vast majority of them, all the ones that seem like puzzles, he explained, I have no idea how to break these. I spent a long time trying to figure out in the MSEM card pool as it currently is how to break them, and I came to the conclusion that all of these weren't solvable yet. And it's kind of like, a meta level thing. If we're just living in a room full of all these puzzles, and if anyone ever solves these puzzles, we all die. And
so what you're telling me is JN is the guy from Saw.
Yeah, JN did a very good Jigsaw impression here, which, hey, check out the set symbol on these cards.
Right. Yeah. All right. The next card is From Ancient Tomes. So this is a 1-mana red sorcery that can give an instant or sorcery card in your graveyard flashback until end of turn. So very simple design. The flashback cost is, of course, equal to its regular mana cost. This is kind of similar to a card that I think some people have been trying to make work recently, which is Backburner, except that it's a sorcery speed card, but it can also hit sorceries. I think that this is honestly not the worst, because like being able to recur your stuff for only 1 mana is pretty efficient. And if you're a Storm deck, like this is the kind of card that can get you extra value from ritualing, and then if you cast this again with like some other recursion effect, like that can add up pretty quickly.
Yeah, so where this was first brought to my attention was I was brewing with CFD Sock, who is another fantastic brewer who unfortunately doesn't play the format anymore. But we were brewing up actual factual Jeskai Ascendancy, and I was like, looking, what are like the best cantrips? And he's like, play this card. And I'm like, really? It doesn't seem that great. And he's like, no, you play this card. And then I played it, and I'm like, oh yeah, this card is actually just insane because it's your best cantrip every time.
Yeah.
It's kind of disgusting in that regard, especially if you have ways to get cards in a graveyard, which is, I think, what Pip's going to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar. If you actually search From Ancient Tomes in the MSEM chat, I'm the first person who brought it up because I initially thought it might be playable in Phoenix. And then I was wrong. And 6 months later, I found the actual best use for it. Which is in Memories Reignited Dragon Calling. Because what From Ancient Tomes does is it allows you to create deterministic Mystic Arts piles. You Mystic Arts from Ancient Tomes plus the insert sorcery you want. In this case, it was Memories Reignited. And your opponent doesn't have a right answer. Either one they give you allow you to cast the card you want to cast. The very basic idea of it is doing the same thing that Gifts Ungiven does, where it looks like, oh, look at all these interesting choices I can make. It's like, nope, you don't actually get to make any choices. From Ancient Tomes might also be good in other shells. You know, it is 1 mana for a mission briefing. It is an instant speed, which is kind of a big deal. It doesn't do card selection, also a big deal. But it will always be the first thing I think of with From Ancient Tomes is deterministic Mystic Arts piles.
Sure, yeah. Definitely a sweet card.
It's simple and straightforward.
Sure yeah. For sure.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Sorry, Dodger.
I was gonna say I'm not sure why this card is on the list, so maybe someone else should talk about it.
Oh, it's because I realized something really messed up you can do with it. So Ion Field is 1 red enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, target player creates 2 1/1 red elemental creature tokens. When you cast an instant or sorcery spell that targets only one target, you may pay 1 red and sacrifice Ion Field. If you do, copy that spell for each other target it could target. Each copy targets a different one of those targets. So the base case of this is it makes 2 1/1s. That's not good enough. But then you cast Stolen Cache, I'm pretty sure is what it's called.
No.
And you pay 5 mana and you steal every land on the battlefield. And
that's insane.
For each land on the battlefield, including your own, you also get a treasure.
Oh my god.
This is
anyway, the Stolen Cache untaps them, right? So you also untap all the lands you used for this.
Yeah. You also probably net mana in the process.
That like quintuples your mana.
And then you cast Sadistic Indulgence. Your opponent doesn't get any of their lands back. You also have more mana than you need for the rest of the game. And also, did I mention that, it makes 2 1/1s. That's kind of shitty. Did I mention the fact that that deck actually can't kill people unless they drop below a certain life threshold? Congrats. Now you have 2 1/1 attackers. That'll be enough to kill your opponent given enough time. So, yeah, I think Ion Field is a sleeper hit in exactly what circumstance, but it's colossally fucked up in that circumstance.
Can you run that combo as like some kind of storm finish? Like if you cast those two, you basically just need any card draw spell and you win the game.
Yeah, that's entirely possible.
I don't know. Like they both seem bad on their own is the thing. So like it's kind of a Splinter Twin situation, I guess. Maybe.
Oh god. Sorry, the phrase Splinter Twin situation just gets me right to the core.
F.
Just like the Don Cheadle thing where it's pain.
Yeah, that is a really, really messed up combo.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things like while we were looking through the entire set, I saw that, I thought about it, I was like, well, I need to inflict this on anyone who's listening now.
I mean, yeah, just let the world hear it so someone can break it and then we can get it changed.
Finally do something about it. Mm-hmm. Jesus.
So yeah, next up is another kind of fucked up red enchantment, Newcomer's Luck. It's 1 in a red. For whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it gets +2/+1 until end of turn. So basically creatures with haste, an anthem for those. And it really was kind of, it used to be 1 mana, and it was just kind of like, we just don't have the density to make it work. And then out of nowhere, Chumbeck won a whole ass GP with a deck built around it, and I think it had like turn 3s. So I was like, maybe not. And so it was nerfed to mana. But it's still quite a powerful anthem.
It's pretty straightforward. Like, it's just an anthem for haste creatures.
Yeah, I think the thing is, like, what happened was you could, like, there's also that anthem from Lovey, which gave them, like, +3/+0, but you take any damage that they take. So you basically just made it so it had, like, a lot of longevity because you stacked up a bunch of these anthems. If they answered your board, then your next token just became lethal. Your next hasty 1/1 just still killed them.
Yeah, and I mean, this card's still messed up if you curve it into Siguratom. Like, that's still...
Wait, Pip's mentioning Siguratom? Oh my god, this is a historic moment. Okay, everyone, the timestamp is 1:54:33. Everyone, like, put this in the comments. Historic moment. Pip has acknowledged Saigura Tom.
Saigura Tom will brew a mean newcomer's luck. I will give him that. I think in general this card like fell off the map after the nerf because of how low to the ground that deck was. But I agree, it's still probably a playable card. It's just there's so many powerful things to be doing in MSEM that I think people sometimes just are incentivized to not break things that have already been broken and nerfed, because they'll be like, we've already seen that. I want to focus on other things. But I think there's still room for someone to come back, break newcomers' luck again, and move on.
If I can do it for Into the Unknown, you can do it for newcomers' luck.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next up we have yet another red enchantment. What is... You're telling me red gets enchantments now that are good? So this is Pyremage's Knack, which is a simple card. Whenever it enters or leaves the battlefield, it deals 2 damage to any target. Okay, sure. It's just kind of a weak sorcery speed shock. I don't get what the big deal is. Until you realize that with any repeated flicker effect like Will of the Fickle Lord or Rippling Curtain, this is just 4 damage each turn cycle, which kills people dead real quick. So Simon, otherwise known as Tyrant, had a deck with this, Will of the Fickle Lord, Flare Blitz, which is another card which deals damage on ETB, and basically just went ham with a control deck that also just had easy ways to burn people out to the face. So it's just good redundancy and kind of a fucked up card for those decks.
Yeah, this is a neat little build around piece. Like, it's powerful if you're doing exactly that. That's pretty much all I'd say.
Yeah. I think, 2 mana for 4 damage, obviously good. But apparently this card's messed up and limited with Sadistic Indulgence and Flicker effects.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I can imagine just like...
Very high draft pick, because also just 2 mana shock is fine.
Yeah, it's good removal that also incidentally can start 3 for 1-ing your opponents.
Yeah, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so next up is our last red card, which is also one that provides powerful reach and face burn. It's Traitor's Execution. It's a 4-mana sorcery, but when you cast a spell, you copy it for each player that has 8 or less life, and it deals 3 damage to target player. Which, oh man, on its base that does suck. When you get to 6 damage, okay, respectable. 4 mana for 9 damage, okay, that just kills people dead. So in the aforementioned like self-damage aggro deck, this is really gas, and it's also just a good way. Like I think lots of aggro decks are going to anyways be running Banished Companions to get their mana out. They're going to be using painful mana bases. So like you can anyways get to like the 8 or less life threshold with a bit of like aggressive play, and then this just becomes probably the best finisher ever. The only problem is the steep mana cost.
Just you win the game if you and your opponent are both at 8 or less.
Mm-hmm.
If this costs 3, I actually think I might try it because then I could cast it for free off of Emissary of Antiquity.
But oh my god.
I think an important thing to remember is that 3 mana for 4 damage is a playable burn spell rate, is in fact a good burn spell rate.
Yeah.
4 mana becomes harder and harder to cast in burn decks, but dealing 9 damage is game over. And one of the things that the burn decks have been complaining as of late is how Banished Companion and their mana bases cause them to take damage. And while I think you can try and lean away from that, you could also lean into it more. One thing that's especially messed up is Traitor's Execution is really fucked up from the sideboard.
Because it seems like a sideboard card.
It is basically immune to counter magic. Because it's not that it's doing more damage per player at 8 or less life, it's copying itself onto the stack. So if you cast, one, it's a 4-drop, you can't Cursory Glance it. They probably won't have negates in against you, and it'll kill them dead. It's basically impossible to stop it. And the other thing that's nice is it helps you know when it's time to scoop. If you get to 4 lands, you have Traitor's Execution, but you realize your opponent has more than 8 life, you should probably stop playing Magic. Just move on. It's okay. You're done.
But what if you have 2 Traitor's Executions? Just play one this turn, play one next turn. Come on now. Get with the program.
It depends on how much life they have. Because I'm thinking of circumstances where they've cast at least 2 copies of Stand Unassailable.
Yeah, okay. Then it's time to shuffle up the old deck and put it back into the box. Okay, and with that, that's our last red card. Our first green one is Champion of the Fae. It's 1 green for 1/1. Oh, you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, this card's my boy. 1 green for 1/1. Whenever you cast a spell during an opponent's turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Champion of the Fae. This card is MSEM's Delver. If you play this on turn 1 and your opponent doesn't answer it, I don't know if I've lost a game where that's happened. But also at the same time, if you draw this on turn like 4, you're just like, why did I even register this card? So there's a really big delta in that regard.
Yeah.
But it's so easy to make this ball out of control. If you get to untap, you can just say, cool, counter your 2-drop with my 2-mana counterspell, put a +1/+1 counter on Champion of the Fae. If you don't do anything, I'll just cast a cantrip. Turn 3, keen to answer back my counterspell. Whoops, that's 2 more counters on Champion of the Fae. Planet Far, Far Away, also 2 counters on it. There's a lot of little ways to start stacking up counters really quickly. And basically, if you're in a tempo deck and you get a 1-mana 3/3, that's a good deal. It's very easy to win a game off the back of a 1-mana 3/3. Champion of the Fae doesn't stop growing. I think the biggest I've seen a Champion of the Fae at is a 8/8. And it's not the worst top deck if you have other board pressure. The main issue with top decking it is the circumstance where tempo decks are kind of dead already. You have no threats on board, you have no interaction left in hand, you top deck a Champion of the Fae. It's like, okay, this isn't going to save you, but also very few threats will. So just gotta accept it.
Yeah, it feels very much like kind of a. It's kind of like an all-in card, etc. In a way, it's like, okay, I'm playing this, like I'm trying to execute this plan, and some amount of games it's just not going to do anything, but some amount of games it will straight up win you the game. So like that is a worthwhile trade-off. I think that sort of tempo deck is still playable, although people have kind of gone a little bigger with stuff like Angel of Sukkar for flash decks. So this card has fallen a little bit out of favor, but it's definitely still a playable card.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's one of the straightforward cards from UNR that I actually kind of like. I think most of the straightforward cards are a little bit worrisome in terms of, oh, is this too easily breakable? And not, this is just like solidly powerful, but also attractive in how it encourages build arounds. But yeah. Next up, we have Mina and Adurnos, who encourage Flash, but in a very different way. 3 green and green for a 3/5 with Flash and Reach. When it enters the battlefield, it fogs, but also when it dies or is countered, you draw 2 cards. So pretty good value versus control decks, and also has good use against, I guess, not if you're getting to turn 5 versus aggro, you probably don't want to be playing. Like, things have gone wrong, but like just in general versus like aggressively oriented decks is still quite strong. I think the main thing that's holding this back is just costing 5 is a little bit of an awkward spot when there's other cards that also have like really good value. But if your opponent is basically playing like oops all counterspells, you can just be like, oh okay, I'm gonna like 2-for-1 you for having to answer my threat on the stack, and it's like, and they're like, well, guess I'll die. I still think Tenacious Guide probably is better, but there are times when sleeving this up is the right answer.
Yeah, this is a very bizarre set of abilities, but it's not a bad one. I think the general play pattern of if you're in some kind of like standard-esque mid-range mirror of like flash this in, fog your attacks, eat your attacker, and you have inherent protection. If your opponent does end up countering it, you get to draw 2 cards. So you like basically 3-for-1 them there. Or if they, like if you just happen to trade it off in combat or they use removal spell, you also get 3-for-1 them. So like this is a fairly this is a card that I think would be very strong in standard, but I'm not sure if it lines up as well into the MSEM like kind of meta.
Yeah, I also have no idea how you beat this card in a game of limited. Just as an aside.
Yeah, no, you don't.
Okay. glad that one's at rare. Gonna enjoy seeing that one come up a bunch. But I don't know. It's a card that I feel like is just doing so many different things that are all individually not like the most powerful thing, but they're also none of these things are trinket text. But I don't think it quite gets there in the current context of MSEM. Yeah.
Okay. So our next card is MSEDH All-Star. So I'm gonna use my executive power to take point on this one. It's Seeker Elizabeth. 1 and a green for a 1/3. Whenever you play a land, investigate. Notably not landfall investigate. Very different. And for 4 mana, sacrifice 3 clues. You get to free cast the top 3 non-lands of your library. And no, you can't whiff because it explicitly grabs the top 3 non-lands. So, really, and like, you can usually, if you have any piece of ramp, in terms of like ramping into Elizabeth, you can get this out on curve, which is kind of disgusting. Like if you have Explorer style ramp, or if you have Dork into turn 2 Elizabeth and then you play your land drop afterwards, just getting her ability on curve is really disgusting. And you usually just get 3 bombs on turn 4 and just end the game. And in MSEM proper, I know like Dravos and Pipsqueak have tried to make her work. She's a little slow and value-y, but still I think a face value strong card. It's just it's harder to justify the balance of like generally like good mid-rangey cards and really expensive bombs that make the cheat out worth it. Whereas in EDH, like, you can play expensive bombs. Ramp is the name of the game.
I think this is closer to MSEM playable than you might think. It's not that hard to play this on turn 2 with a land, and congrats, now you have a cantrip. Like, I think that like if you do ever activate this, you probably just win the game if you built your deck around it correctly. Although sometimes you might hit like 3 ramp spells or whatever, and you're sad.
But I mean, like, then it's you spent 4 mana to get how much mana worth of cards directly like cast for free?
Yeah.
Like, you're still. That's the thing. Is like even if you whiff with this, you're not likely to be whiffing hard. You're just not high rolling people. Like, if you can activate it, you're still spending 3 cards, i.e., 3 clues, for 3 cards, but you're spending blue, red, and green and 1 instead of whatever the mana cost is on those cards. Like, I think it's definitely a far cry from Tireless Tracker, but also Tireless Tracker is an obscene card. This is a 2-drop.
Yeah, I mean, like what really holds this card back is obviously the play a land instead of triggering on landfall. Which thank God, like we
this card. There's no world in which this card is okay on landfall.
Yeah. I wonder if there's a version of Wanderfall that splashes blue to enable this. I think that's a bit win more, but there's also the potential of you just play this and then.
Let's see, if you splash blue, you also get Markarth Assailant.
Yeah, no, I mean like no cap, maybe. Yeah. Although Markarth isn't the greatest to like flip over because then it's just.
I know this is awful. It's awful to flip over off of this, but
yeah,
it's just another
is a really
powerful land-based
card. So I think like this card overall is a very Timmy card, but it's nice that it's.
Yeah. The other question is, currently there aren't that many sets in MSEM that have investigate as a mechanic. We have 3, I think, and it's not
like a lot
that. It is a lot, but 2 of them it's not very prevalent in. Like we don't have that many playable cards other than Wheat from Chef that are investigate.
Prying Inquiry. There's the black one. Crack open the cache.
Certainly not in blue, red, green though. Like crack open the cache, sure, but you don't really want to main deck it. Like a lot of the question about Seeker Liz is if you can hit enough. If we end up printing other investigate cards, her stock also goes up. Like she's a good way of enabling herself. But if you had, like, I don't know, something that investigates on turn 1, suddenly she becomes much more messed up.
Did you mean Wheat from Chaff?
I did, in fact, put that in a deck together. Can't say I recommend, but that's a thing I did.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, ooh, I like this next card. This is a card I've always wanted to play, even though I've never played it.
For sure, take it away.
It's a Slapfield Overseer. So it's a 2-mana 0/1. It's a mana dork, so it taps for green. But the kicker is, whenever you tap any creature for mana, it gets a +1/+1 counter on that creature. So I love playing green decks, and I often play decks with, like 6 to 8 mana dorks. And well, if you are running this with a bunch of other mana dorks, lets those scale infinitely while they're generating you mana. And then once you've played all your stuff, you can just be like, all right, time to swing in with my, giant creatures that I paid 1 mana for and that also accelerated. Like, there's a lot of room for this card to kind of just snowball out of control if you do drop in the early game along with another mana dork. And although it's kind of sad that this doesn't work with the Encourage from Hierarch Ranger, it's not that big a deal. I don't know. It's just a card I've always wanted to run because it seems very fun to play.
Yeah, it also does obscene things with Gathering the Gang, because it's like, yeah, that Augur played it in a list there, and it was just like, oh, okay, yeah, sure.
Seems like lots of things do pretty obscene things with Gathering the Gang.
Yeah, but most of them. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I'm pretty sure CFT Sock played this in a couple of combo decks. Some of that might have been with the Gathering the Gang engine that Augur found, but I think it. Oh, you know what it was?
It was
one of the cards.
It was in the Granny
pushed
deck.
us over. No, yeah, that was a deck that CFT Sock played it in, but this was one of the cards that pushed us over into reworking Devoted Druid when it was legal in MSEM, because that is infinite mana.
That sure is. Wow.
All my homies hate Devoted Druid. But yeah, okay, so next up we have Twist the Threads.
Ooh, okay, I built with this card. I think it's a card that should be seeing more play than 0.
I mean, it used to be even more fucked up because didn't it used to switch on power, which was not okay?
Oh, yeah, then that's a no.
It did, yeah.
Yeah, so this was changed for obvious reasons. But
yeah.
I'm interested to hear how the new version is playable. So take it away.
Okay, yeah. So we're all familiar with Chiku Champion. Let's talk about Twisted Threads first. So Twisted Threads, it's a 1-mana instant. It lets you exchange a creature you both own and control with a creature in your hand that has the same converted mana cost. And it also has Flashback for 2 mana. So the deck I built with this is attempting to use Ominous Heart, which is a 9-mana creature that costs 1 less for each card in your graveyard, along with Twisted Threads. So you spend the first couple turns dredging yourself, filling up your graveyard. Maybe you also hit your Twisted Threads, and then you just drop in your Ominous Heart, cast Twisted Threads, and swap it for a Chiku Champion, and then you win the game. So you can do that as soon as turn 3, technically, if you hit the nut draw. But the deck also can just kind of play like regular mid-range deck, because all you need is fill your graveyard while casting stuff that incidentally does that, and you have spots for removal and stuff. In general, it's just like a pretty sweet combo, I think. It's also resilient because Twist Threads has 2 casts per turn. And if you bounce your Ominous Heart and they somehow deal with your Chiku Champion, you can just use the same Ominous Heart for the second Threads.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. That is kind of a nasty combo.
Yeah, I mean,
the question is,
there's other cards that you can cast for cheap that have high converted mana costs. Like if we ever get Delve, we may get something like that. So this can be a good way to cheat out big creatures using a similar method. I just happen to go with the Ominous Heart route, but there are probably other ways.
Yeah, I think my only concern would be you need to like mill yourself, and then also like play these big beaters and then hope they don't die, and then you need to twist the threads them. It's like feels like
Yeah, it's
it, it feels like you maybe just like going the mill and beats route may be a little bit better, but also it doesn't have the high roll of like you're just dead on turn 4. So
yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, I don't know. I haven't played any game. I have no idea. Not. But in theory, it seems like a pretty sweet deck.
and isn't that the only thing that we need in life?
That's
Sweetness.
true. Yeah.
Okay. So next up we have Unnoticed in the Glade, which I think bears resemblance to uh oh, what is
Rude
that
Awakening?
card? Sylvan Awakening. Yeah, which uh turns all of your lands into tutus as well. This one you can also use it as pseudo hexproof by turning your creatures into lands, but that's not what we're here for. I'm not actually sure why this is on the list. It seems quite powerful in the right situation, but I'm not sure what that situation would look like in MSEM. So I'm going to leave it to you guys to talk me through your thoughts on this card.
So my thoughts on this card were pretty much just I feel like you can abuse this somehow, which I guess is probably not the greatest approach to this review because you kind of can do that for any card here. But okay, so it has two modes. The first mode is 1 green, counter target board wipe, because turning all your creatures to colorless forest lands is a very good way of your board wipes not working. Um, and the other kind of neat upside to that is, you know, it's in green. Green doesn't usually get that much mass indestructible like that. Um, it also dodges most spot removal, etc. Although it definitely doesn't save you from Demon Worthy, which is a little unfortunate. And
Kind of
then as
niche,
the
but
other,
the first ability can also be a ritual if you have a bunch of creatures.
mm-hmm,
Um,
absolutely.
yeah.
And then the second ability can act as reach, where if you have 4 lands, this is a deal 4. Uh, so it's kind of a neat little card where it can be both a anti-board wipe card while also being reach, and that's really unique. Um, it probably also has some neater combo applications, but I think those start involving a lot of different moving parts. So I I don't know how to do that personally, but yeah.
Yeah, fair. I think just the straightforward approach is probably the best with this one. Um, and I think
Yeah.
with that we are done with the monocolored cards in the set. Next up is our first multicolored card, and it's kind of a banger. It's Featherfall Ascetic.
Oh boy.
It's a hybrid blue and a white. Um, for 0/1, you might be wondering why am I playing this 3 mana 0/1? Well, it also creates a 1/1 with flying when it enters the battlefield, and it basically copies each aura you control and puts it onto each creature you control. So it was part of a combo deck that had potential like turn 3, turn 4. So it was back when it was 2 mana, so it was nerfed to 3. It's also just like a and basically this is what we were talking about with Slapfield Workgate, where you could just make a bunch of bodies, drop a bunch of auras that gave them evasion or indestructible or just other stats that made them hard to deal with, and then just ran train on an opponent, essentially. It was one of those cards which was, I think, until someone specifically Blues Eclipse built with it, it was like, yeah, okay, I see what this is intended to do, but is it good enough for MCM? And it was like, oh yeah, it definitely is.
It's also one of those things where it has particularly powerful synergies with some spells like Ethereal Armor, where creating Ethereal Armor is a good card. We know that from every single standard appearance it has made, and also modern. But making an Ethereal Armor for each creature you control is actually casting Craterhoof Behemoth. So that's kind of messed up, it turns out, to do for 2 mana back when it was 2 mana. And even 3 mana, it's still kind of nuts.
Yeah, I think lately when Blues has the kind of the rise version of the deck, it's used more as like a value engine. So you'll you'll play an aura that draws a card on ETB and make a bunch of cards.
Mhm.
And like go for that instead of like trying to burst someone down with Slapfield Workgate, etc., etc. Which seems okay, but like it's a lot slower, and you can always just kill the Featherfall. So like I think that deck's a lot weaker. But yeah, I mean it's a very cool design. Very powerful in Magical Christmas Land if you get all the decks in a row.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Next up is Accursed by Unborn Fates, and continuing the theme, it's also part of a combo deck. Pip, do you want to talk about this one?
Yeah, so this is a card that's near and dear to my heart. I played a combo control deck for a little bit called Freeze Your Brain, which back when Seek Prophecy milled, and you had Oracle's Vision or Cursed by Unborn Fates, and you basically just controlled the game for the first 4 turns of the game, and then you just milled your opponent out because you played all these symmetrical mill cantrips, or just milled yourself, and then you milled them for 20 and then another 20. But that deck was bad, and now we have a good deck that uses this card. So a Lovely Awoken card called Resigned to Madness is you mill half your library, and then you can reanimate a creature. And if the creature you reanimate is Herald of Wisdom, it can cast any instant sorcery spell with CMC 4 or less from your graveyard. So you can go ahead and cast a Curse by Unborn Fates. And if so you've milled your opponent half their library, and then you mill them for cards equal to your library. This will usually take care of someone, assuming that half your library plus half their library equals the total of their library. But that means it actually doesn't totally work if you've drawn more cards and played some lands and all those things. So the way that Hersey solved this issue was you just put in a Dream Well shell, because if you mill 70 cards, that'll be enough. I had a really bad time in that mirror once because I miscounted and accidentally milled my opponent all but the last 4 cards in their library, and Hersey then just untapped and milled me back. So that sucked. Would not recommend that. But this card in general is really hype. I've also gotten the chance to play with it in limited, and it's phenomenal there. Highly recommend drafting that deck if you ever open this. Yeah.
Oh yeah, as we saw, like Mill is really powerful in UNR Limited, especially with like Rune Scribe's
100%.
Apprentice, and there's another 3 mana card which whenever an artifact or enchantment enters the battlefield, you like mill your opponent 3 or something. So you can do some dummy stuff. But yeah, okay. Next up is another
Yeah.
blue-black mill card. I could have if I knew this was coming up, I probably could have transitioned that better. But yeah, it's Oracle's Vision, otherwise known as the blue-black mill card that has seen more play from UNR. So each player mills 3 cards, draw a card. So obviously there is the double-edged sword if you're playing a graveyard mirror, but also this card is just kind of insane for lots of strategies. It's good in Phoenixes. It was good in it's like good in like graveyard based control decks. I think it was even good in some dredge builds. It's kind of just a jack of all trades for I need to fill up my graveyard fast, boss.
Yeah. This card's nuts. It's always been nuts. I'm pretty sure that this card is probably contributing to some slightly it's contributing to some archetypes being more powerful than they would be if this was not legal, which I guess is just a little bit of a self-fulfilling statement.
Yeah.
But this card does so much work when you're in a deck that wants to fill up your graveyard as fast as possible, and you don't care what with. So you can turbo out Nats on turn 2 with this. So it's you'll know when you want it, and it's really really good then.
What I do like about this card is that there's actually a surprising amount of risk to running it sometimes, because if you're a deck that wants this card for whatever reason, like to fill your graveyard, and your opponent is also a deck that wants to fill their graveyard, guess what? If they use their graveyard better than you do, like you are just helping them at the end of the day. So like it's a very risky card in some matchups. Which usually means you can just side it out and it's like whatever. But like I do like that it's at least somewhat self-balancing in that respect. But yeah, it is very, very powerful. It's probably the card from this set that I put into the most decks. And it's just there are a lot of decks that would not be nearly as viable without this card.
Mm-hmm. I think I don't think it's too far of a stretch to call it the single most impactful card from UNR.
Oh yeah, I actually said that like earlier. Yeah.
Oh, okay, my bad.
Yeah, I definitely think it is the single most impactful card that is still legal in UNR.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
True. Okay.
Okay. Next card is Tear Through. Pretty simple. It's a hybrid red-green instant. Target creature gets +3/+1, gains trample until end of turn. A brute force that gives trample as well is pretty darn close to being like lightning bolt, and can sometimes be better lightning bolt because it can more than 3 damage through. I think that like obviously +3/+1 means that this isn't as good for saving creature from removal and stuff, but like this is a great way to sometimes just kill people. And I've run it in some decks like the early versions of Parrot Pools as kind of just a cheap multicolored spell you could cast that also does 3 damage to people. It's a nice thing to keep in mind as just like a good tool. It's hybrid, so it goes in both red and green decks. I don't know if you guys have anything to add.
No, I think you've summarized
it.
it.
It has a history in like blitzy prowess aggro decks, and and other similar stuff.
I think people sometimes put in decks they should put in. Like if your plan is to put this on Autumn Fae, just run brute force. The extra 2 points of toughness will probably save your life one day. But something cute that I just noticed is the fact it actually references Fae in the flavor text, which I believe is unintentional in terms of the Autumn Fae plus Tear Through synergy, but that's still cute.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next up is actually a new card to the set, I think. Added specifically for the rework. It's Enigma of 70 Scrolls. It's blue and a red instant. Choose a card name, then look at the top card of your library. If it has a chosen name, you may exile it, and you may play it from exile until end of turn. Whenever a creature you control becomes tapped, you may return an Enigma of 70 Scrolls from your graveyard to the hand. It seems like it takes a lot of work for this to get going. I know there's that. Well, what is that one card that used to be played in Miracles? That cantrip. All I can think of is Mies, but Mies is the not. That's the uncard.
Oh, you mean predict? You mean predict?
Oh, predict.
Yeah.
Predict is like this but good, where
Yeah.
the kill case is a cantrip and the upside is nuts.
Yeah, like I don't feel like this is that good. I don't know what y'all
think. The
think.
best thing you can do this card is use it to spam out a bunch of prowess triggers or something. If you are somehow like tapping and untapping your creature, you can cast this like a million times. It's like a little finicky piece that.
Yeah, I think the issue is you also need you need something that basically gives you look at the top card of your library ability. So like I just feel like you need so many pieces to get this one finicky engine to work.
Yeah, like I don't think it's good personally, but maybe there's a deck that uses all of its.
I think Kevin is the one who put this on the list, and unfortunately he is not here to defend himself. Rest in peace.
Okay. Oh.
Okay. Next up, we have another blue-red hybrid card, one which I'm more excited for. It's Oracle's Disciple. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So, what is it that you said, Pip? You had like a comment that I thought was a pretty good description.
It says build your own mentor with this plus Unraveling Strikebreaker.
Yeah. So I feel like yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I guess, but you can also just run Centered Acolyte, which is kind of the same in a way. Where I did try this is in Parrot Pools. Problem is it's not good if you don't have Parrot Pools already, and if you have Parrot Pools already, you win the game. So like, you don't really need it. But like I think there are scenarios where you can run this, like maybe in Wizard's aggro or something. This does something. I don't know.
Where I flagged Oracle's Disciple was the fact you can kind of build your own Monastery Mentor with it plus Unreal Strikebreaker. It's also, it's a 2/2 with prowess for 2. It's a decent field case. It's really easy to cast. It has some good creature types in terms of synergies, but I definitely don't think it is anywhere near as nuts as some of the other cards we've looked at here.
A solid role player, if anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Pip. Tell us about the next card.
All right. I think it's just kind of a beautiful thing if you look through the MSEM server and see the first moment where I decided to start brewing around this card. Dreamsight Well is 1 and a blue-green hybrid. I'm really not sure what's green about this card. I'm going to be honest. Shuffle up to 5 cards you own from outside the game into your library. Then if your library contains at least 40 cards more than the minimum deck size, draw 5 cards. So that just means if your library has 100 or more cards, like something normal people do. When I first built this deck, I remember asking, is a draw 5 a good enough reason to play 140 cards? And the number I came to 140 cards wise was I wanted to have a very good chance of having a Dreamsight Well or a tutor-defined Dreamsight Well in my first 10 cards. And I wanted to minimize the chance that it would draw enough cards to turn off Dreamsight Wells. The initial response, by the way, to that question was probably not. 140 cards is a lot of cards in your deck. You're going to totally fuck up your consistency. And then the terrifying thing that I learned is you don't take a consistency hit. Well, it's less true now than it was back then. MSEM has insanely powerful recursion tools and really, really powerful tutor tools, which makes decks that want to build themselves around finding and recasting this card as many times as possible just incredibly potent and thoroughly viable. Something you'll see in Vintage and in Australian Highlander and also in Canadian Highlander, to my understanding, is there are some decks that are just built around, I'm going to find Ancestral Recall and I'm going to cast Ancestral Recall as many times as possible, and I will just, it doesn't matter what the rest of my deck contains because I will kill you with the number of cards I draw. And Dreamsight Well does that. 2 mana for drawing 5 cards is absurd. It doesn't matter. You will frequently draw more cards than you can fit in hand with Dreamsight Well, and you'll have to discard down to maximum hand size. It's like, oh no, I only spent 2 mana on a draw out 5, discard 2. Oh, how sad is that?
Shout out to the time when I don't remember who started, but then people started playing Seek the Future as tech in Dreamsight Wells because it makes you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game.
That has to be a Gateways thing, because I don't think I did that, and I can't imagine Cyber doing that. But that absolutely sounds like a thing that Gateways would have done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it sounds like Gateways thing.
It's Dreamsight Well is a really fun card to resolve. Because you can just be playing this deck where you're interacting, you're 1-for-1ing, you're 1-for-1ing, you're 1-for-1ing, and then it doesn't matter how many times you've 1-for-1 to your opponent because now you're 5 cards up. And that feeling of dread when you're sitting across the table from Dreamsight Well, I've never experienced it because I've always been the smart one on the other side of the table, but I can't imagine it feels good.
Yeah.
I think
I haven't watched it since it happened, but I really would love to go back and watch that Icon Black versus Dreamsight Control recorded match.
Yeah. Having to dodge around Refracted Thoughts makes that matchup really whack. But that was also when Dreamsight Well had none of its cards nerfed, so that was a really fucked up version of that deck.
One thing I like about Dreamsight Well is that you get, by virtue of playing this deck, you get an excuse to play a lot of cards that maybe aren't as good, but are worth playing.
They're borderline playable.
They're kind of they're unplayable by comparison, but you need cards, because you can't just run the normal cards that you would, right? So I think that it's a cool excuse to play some lesser played cards.
Absolutely. And you also can get away with some stupid things both because the shuffling in cards and because I'm not that likely to draw these sideboard cards. You can run some kind of niche cards that you will either eventually tutor for or just draw into if the game goes on long enough. Yeah. At one point in time, I was main decking 3 copies of Stand Unassailable and Dreamsight Well because the meta was just such that I was pretty confident that was the best win condition. The one other kind of fucked up thing to mention is the very first build of Dreamsight Well had a win condition of Cane Dancer beats, the Ancestral Council beats, a single Recall Forgotten Aeons, and otherwise planning to deck my opponent. I played one match and realized this is miserable. I'm not doing this again. Although I realized, I won with Recall Forgotten Aeons. Maybe that card's good in this deck. And
Oh yeah,
I shoved
maybe.
I shoved 3 more copies in, didn't look back. And that was also one of the first times RFE like really showed up in the format, because it was pretty shortly after Real Wars release that I started fucking around with Dreamset Well.
But yeah, okay. So other fucked up things about this card are, because you're running a bunch of tutors anyways, getting to sideboard mid game one, in addition to drawing a bunch of cards, is just ridiculous. Because you're probably, with one of the 5 cards, you're probably drawing into a tutor.
Or one of the sideboard cards.
I've
shuffled
cards.
in stand syllables and drawn them, and it's like, okay, great. This is what I was looking for. Basically, just a tutor with upside.
Yeah. I think that there was definitely a time where Dreamsight Well was the best control deck in the format, bar none, which is a crazy thing to say, but very true. Now, though, I think that the consistency hits that it suffers can be a little bit more visible, and also the main thing is that like you do have tutors, but you do also take a tempo hit for having to like take a turn off 2 tutor stuff, and usually it's not like completely off. Like you have like the 1/4 mana tutor that abounds, or you have Ancestral Council which puts a body on the board, but it still can be not enough to be worth taking the like it's not enough of a advancing your game plan type of action. So it definitely has fallen off quite a bit. Also because of the aforementioned nerfs to stuff like Deadly Manipulation and co.
Yeah, I think if Deadly Manipulation hadn't been banned, I think if Cane Dancer hadn't been nerfed, I think if whatever the Grave Tutor hadn't been nerfed, I think Dreamsight Will would still be the best control deck in the format.
Yeah, it'll also be a much more miserable format, not just specifically because of Dreamsight Will, but I also think that those cards were in the long run not sustainable.
I think Cane Dancer casting Imperial Sieges was probably not a healthy thing for the format. Yes, but yeah, no, I think Dreamsight Well still has a place in terms of it is very hard to create a control deck that is bigger and greedier than Dreamsight Well. And if the format ever starts being a arms race to the top greed fest again, I will be dusting off my copies of Dreamsight Well, because it is the best way, bar none, to go over the top. The one other thing that I would note is, we've talked a lot about, it's 2 mana and like you could cast early in the game and stuff, is 2 mana makes it trivial to protect in the late game. One of the things that really makes Dreamsight Well so terrifying versus in control deck mirrors is when you get to those late game control stalls where it's going to resolve a threat first. Dreamsight Well is really easy to sequence while holding up 2 or 3 counter spells of backup, and other control decks don't have that same luxury. It's also 2 colors, so you can't Reckless Ambition it, which is kind of neat.
Wait, do you mean Destructive Ambition?
Destructive Ambition.
You forgot the name of your own card.
I have enough cards in the format. That's okay.
Weird flex, but okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
But yeah, anyways, Dreamsight Well I think is like we said that Oracle Vision is the one that had the most impact on the format, but I think Dreamsight Well is the card that of the playable cards from UNR is the most fun / most unique, and
it's probably the most beloved.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay, and with that, we're on to a far less beloved blue-red hybrid card, Feyblessed Attendant. It's basically a boggle. Augur has run it before. It's a boggle. I'm assuming it's being put on this list because it's a pretty decent boggle. It's a boggle. Have I mentioned it's a boggle?
It's nice that if you have whatever threat you have that you're putting auras on, that's the thing it protects, and they have to kill this first. So like you can drop it on turn 1, and your opponent can't kill it with spot removal, and then you can play whatever your actual threat that you want to play is, and then boom, bada boom. Like you're pretty much like your opponent's gonna have to spend 2 pieces of removal. So like, I think this is a solid card for like Pawblade style decks. I'm not sure if I would run this in Pawblade because I'd rather just play a Mana Dork on turn 1, but like I like the idea of playing this on turn 1 and just dropping a Skypath Pilgrimage on it, or playing my double striker and then dropping a Skypath Pilgrimage on it next turn, and it'll have Hexproof because of my Faithless Attendant. So like, I don't know. I think there's neat stuff we can do with this.
Mm-hmm. Being able to transfer the hexproof is all upside and no downside, because I feel like you really only want this to have hexproof natively if you're going to be boggling it up. Otherwise, yeah, giving hexproof to your bigger threat is always better. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think there's much else to say.
Yep, and with that, we're done with the multicolored cards. We're getting on to our colorless. Though the first one, you could almost say it's a multicolored card. It's Nexus of Possibilities. 1 mana for an artifact. If you would choose one or more modes, you may choose an additional modes. I can guarantee you that line of text has caused the most confusion. Not most. That's a hard thing to say, but it's definitely caused. It's one of the highest rules confusion lines of text in this set. It also acts as mana filtering, and at 6 mana, you can skip all the way to 10 Wooburg, which can do some really fun stuff depending on your win con. But yeah, overall, like it's hard to. I feel like this card is not played enough because it does a lot. It does so much. Like, even without the modality, just being a nice fixing rock that also has some dummy ramp to when you want to drop, like, let's say, Children of the Clouds is really strong. So.
Yeah, so I think the main place this has seen play is in the Tron deck that won a GP, which was a combo Tron list, where you ramped into Nexus of Possibilities plus Abandoned Monument and then generated infinite mana. And infinite mana, I have heard, can be quite good. I don't even remember how the deck killed people, but it did it decently. One thing to know about Nexus of Possibilities.
I feel like Seraphina's gifted some shit to them. I remember that.
Seraphina's gift was how it got Abandoned Monument onto the battlefield.
Actually, no, yeah, you're right. I think did it just Salvation Engine for Infinite Angels? Maybe. I don't know.
That sounds plausible. The rules confusion that Caillou's noting involves the first mode, and how the first mode interacts with Escalate, which is to say, not the way you want it to. Nexus of Possibilities just lets you choose an extra mode. Escalate already lets you choose all the modes. It just asks for a cost for everyone beyond the first. Sad.
Okay. And next up, we have Runic Pillars, which, again, I am claiming EDH priority on this one. If this becomes MSEM playable, like, I will be, like, color me surprised, but in EDH, this is just one of the best rocks, because it's like, oh, okay, just take me all the way to 8 on turn 4. Sure, let's do it. Not turn 4, turn 5.
I mentioned that JN is a big cube fanatic, and the Thran Dynamo really jumps out of this one.
Oh, yeah. The only entering tapped is obviously like a big drawback for like chaining rocks.
It is a drawback, yeah.
But it's still like, if you're like in a format which is so go big or go home, just this and being colorless, like, oh my god, yeah, this is an EDH staple. I don't think there's much else we need to say about it.
Speaking of cards that are probably EDH staples, I think.
Salvation Engine, which we just mentioned.
Oh, okay. There you go. Yeah.
At 9 mana, legendary artifact. For 3 mana, create a 9/9 colorless angel artifact creature token with flying and lifelink. Shout out to the one EDH game, which was literally just I think it was I don't remember who it was. I think it was like Psycho Naifu and some other people. It was just playing hot potato with Salvation Engine, because Psycho Naifu played Salvation Engine off of the Paranoia Commander, and then I temporary treasoned it, and then everyone else, instead of focusing me down, focused down Psycho so that they could kill Psycho so that the Salvation Engine would disappear, because just that's how strong of a card it is.
Oh, that's so unfortunate. Yeah, I mean, this card kind of, like, if you're gonna cheat out a permanent, this isn't the worst one to do, but it's not like as I don't think it's as good as something like Head of Ulko because you still have to keep putting extra mana into it. So if you spend your turn to get this out, but you don't have any more mana, then you could die on the backswing or something like that.
Semi-relevant note: Salvation Engine in its initial wildcard approved iteration was 1 mana to activate that ability, which I think changes a lot of things very quickly.
Yeah. Because like if you have any mana left over, suddenly you have a Valir
Whoops.
token. Yeah.
One of my impressive MSEM casual game stories is I've beaten an active Salvation Engine. My opponent cheated it out, and I made a token, and I like bounced the first token or something like that, and then just went to the races. That was a very exciting and terrifying game.
Yeesh.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All
I
right,
think just an awe-inspiring and fun effect.
Yeah, no, it's a very cool card.
And getting to the last card of the set, it's the Volstoi Key. 2 mana legendary artifact with whenever you sacrifice a clue, you lose life equal to the number of clues you control. Then investigate twice. So, is it just me or does this feel like this should be a black card, or like just the flavor of it just feels like go big or go home in such a black way? But yeah, I think this card is like it's great for value. I also think it has in some infinites with like Erlen and stuff. I don't know how you mitigate the life loss, but like I know that like some people have like brewed and theory crafted with it at some point. But
you could use Guardian of what's it called? Guardian of Dusk.
Aha! See, it's all coming together.
Yeah, I mean, the card. I like that. I like the rolling combo. That's probably the best thing you can do with this. Seems like a somewhat powerful EDH card because you have more life to play with.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But you have to get it rolling with an investigate card, so like it doesn't do anything before that, which isn't great.
Yeah. Also, wait. I just realized that this is probably super disgusting with Elizabeth, because you just get in.
Yeah,
No, because when you sacrifice.
Yeah.
Because when you sacrifice into her ability, you just like, okay, now I will get 6 clues. You do lose a bunch of life, but you can just keep spinning your wheels.
Personally, I feel like if you activate Elizabeth one game,
that's fair. That's
so
fair.
Like,
that is.
I don't really.
That is entirely true based on personal experience, but never underestimate EDH players' greed for value.
Well, I mean, if you're EDHing, then yeah, go for it. Play Elizabeth. I was thought you were talking about it.
Pip, do you remember any of the MSEM applications of this?
I don't think. I'm pretty sure some people have talked about it, but I'm fairly confident that they're liars.
Got you.
For lack of a better phrase.
So, on that note, with Pip calling me a filthy liar, I think that's a great note to end this review on. Just real wholesome. But thanks everyone for joining us. This set has been on the docket for a while, actually. I'm really glad we got to get around to it, especially given the recent rework. Dodger, are we going to be seeing any more UNR in MSEM's draft future?
Maybe. I mean, we did just spend 2 weeks on it, so we're probably going to be doing some other sets for a while. But it'll probably come back it could come back in like a month or so, I'd say.
Yep, and we now have, I believe, for participation. If you participate in a draft, you get to vote on / submit sets that you want, or like you get to both vote on which sets we play next week, and you get to submit suggestions for which sets are voted on in general. So if you like the look of the set, come by Thursdays at, is it 4:10 PST?
It's 5 PST.
5 PST. Come by Thursdays 5 PST for our weekly draft event. But yeah. And does anyone else have stuff to say?
Nope.
Not much.
Okay. In that case, until next time, this is Caillou, Pipsqueak, and Dodger signing off.